I call an order meeting the Board of Trustees, the Austin School District for Monday, March 5th, 2012 at 6:35 p.m. The board may meet in closed session to deliberate the appointment, employment, evaluation, reassignment duties, discipline, or dismissal of a public officer or employee, deliberation of the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property, deliberation about negotiated contract for a prospective gift to the district, deliberation about commercial or financial information that the board has received from business prospect, or deliberation of the offer of financial or other incentive to a business prospect, enter consult with legal counsel concerning pending or contemplated litigation or on a settlement offer or on a matter which the school district's legal counsel determines to be confidential in accordance with Chapter 551 of the Texas Government Code, Sections 551.074, 551.072, 551.073, 551.087, and 551.071, respectively. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Move approval.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor of that motion, please raise your right hand. Passed unanimously. Thank you, board. Let's go to the pledge.
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Okay, thank you, folks. Miss Lavoie is out. Sadly, there was a passing in her family, and so she has been out of pocket, and we give her our sympathies and look forward to her return shortly, but not this evening. And I've not yet heard from Mr. Snyder. So we will now move to the first item on the agenda is the naming of the new early childhood center. And I'm going to say, you Dr. Christopher, go ahead.
Intro for you. Mr. President, Board of Trustees, the first item on your agenda this evening is the discussion of names for the new Early Childhood Center scheduled to open in August 2012. The board discussed the policy, process, and criteria at your January 9th work session, had subsequent discussions at the January 23rd and February 13th board dialogue meetings. At the request of the board calendar committee scheduled this item for discussion again this evening. Following your past practice, President Williams will lead this discussion. In your notebook tonight, we've provided all of the documents previously provided to the board pertaining to this item. The board is scheduled to take action on the name for the new center at its March 26 regular board meeting. Mr. President, this is your agenda item.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate board members. You realize that we go through these, every time we have a new building, and they're always challenging because you get a lot of really good nominees. We try to go through and do our best job of finding the right match for facility and person. But it's always emotional because there's a lot of folks that are really worthy nominees for facilities, but then just trying to figure out what we do. I want to thank staff. If you look at what the material that's put together in the binder, there's been a tremendous effort led by Pat Dabbert, who's in the audience, but thank you for helping to put all this together. We've got a lot of information based on the individual nominations. There's, as you can see in section 1, there's a whole series of letters as well, supplementing at least some of the nominees that we got. In section 2, you see the nomination or the recommendation that came from Linder, which, as you recall, this particular facility was designed as the Early Childhood Center to relieve Linder, and they've submitted their recommendation for that name. And then there's a bunch of other information about past nominations that maybe didn't go and who have been selected, as well as a description of the center and our policies on this matter. So it's really board discretion about what name we choose. We have not defined a specific criteria that says certain facilities will be named in a certain way. One of the things that came up out of this process in a prior meeting was maybe we need to relook at the process by which we go through and name facilities. But because this process was already in flight, it's probably difficult to go back and reapply a new process, which we haven't yet discussed to this. So we do need to move forward on this one. But I think there has been discussion about scheduling a dialogue in the future to revisit our whole process for naming it and try to take some of the emotion out of it, but maybe make it a little bit more definitive in terms of the criteria that we're using for facilities and names. And I'm going to throw this out and you guys can take it from here, but when I look at this information, and we've been talking about it, and I know it's very difficult, there were two names that were both prominent in terms of recommendations, both in terms of volume and the substance of recommendations. For me personally, when I look at the names, and particularly that we're naming an early childhood center, which was one of the criteria that we talked about, and when you look at the recommendations that came from the Texas Early Childhood Coalition Center, the Austin Community for Education, as well as the recommendation from the Linder Elementary School, CAC, was to support the nomination of Anita Uphouse. I guess my suggestion, for the sake of time, would be to say that's where I think, at least I am, in trying to reflect the values of the particular school that we're relieving, as well as the early childhood connection. Knowing there's some other incredibly worthy nominees that I think we have to find the right place to recognize those at the appropriate time as well. But for this facility at this time in this place, it feels like Anita Uphouse makes the most sense, although again, there's no slam dunks in the kind of stuff we do. So I wanted to throw that out as at least a potential get it on the table as a recommendation, and then open it up for other conversations, suggestions from y'all. Looking forward again to action on the 26th at our next regular meeting. So any comments, questions or comments, I was going to say. So folks reasonably comfortable with that approach? Okay. So what we're saying was that really based on the information we'd received from primarily the early childhood community, but largely from what Linda recommended, and the weight of the information we've got, it seems like that the best match of facility, program, and naming would be Anita Uphouse. And that there are a lot of other incredibly worthy nominees on this list that we've got, and that we need to think about the appropriate place to recognize those. But at this time, for this facility in this place, it feels like Anita Uphouse might make the most sense. And so I'm putting that forth as a proposal for the board to consider, knowing that these are very difficult things to do, so trying to get something on the table. So thoughts, Mr. Guzman?
One of the other nominees that received a lot of support. Yes, it is. Maybe it's too far away. One of the other nominees that received a lot of support was Dr. Guerrero Thompson. And so I understand that the candidate Uphouse her career was in early childhood, and I understand that rationale. But I would like to say that at the earliest time in the future that we ought to strongly consider Dr. Guerrero Thompson for naming of again an appropriate kind of facility, based on the fact that her career that she spent here and the legacy that she left.
I certainly would support that. Other comments or questions at this point? Okay. Anybody else? Okay, absent that, let's move forward with that, and then let's take into consideration. And then, so I guess it's a two-part. Obviously, we want to keep Dr. Guerrero Thompson in mind as we move forward, but we also need, as a board, to look at our criteria and schedule some time and maybe Ms. Brister and Mr. Torres to talk about what is our criteria and how we're going to decide what's the right match of criteria in advance of facility naming request and process. How do we want to go about doing that? And I think there was some discussion about what other districts do as well that we probably ought to look at. Ms. Moya.
To that point, so as soon as the calendar committee get something on our calendar, we should also work that into the policy committee's work as well. Once we get the feedback from the board on our suggestions and ideas on how to improve the process and the policy, then the policy committee would need to be addressing it as well. And so I'm just going to have to depend on staff to pass that information along to Mr. Waxler.
I think we can get the calendar, because I think it'll be a dialogue item and then go from there. Mr. Torres.
The calendar committee being on top of things, actually during the last meeting, has actually scheduled time for these items.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we like to see that. Okay, so thank you all very much. Everybody okay? Okay, let's move on to the next item, which is, and we have scheduled the CBOC at 7. I don't know if they are coming. Well, the budget's not, was moved to at 8:30 on our calendar. So I was thinking this, and the CBOC was at 7, and the capital improvements was at 7:45, and I guess to do the budgets last. So, do we know where did Lawrence go? 'Cause maybe
They're not here.
were they? I'm wondering if are they anticipating 7 or are they anticipating much later? Because our calendar, I think, was trying to put the guest first and then have,
I think they moved it back.
Send the police out.
okay.
No, I'm pretty sure
W-
they switched it for a reason.
Okay, so if we want to start with the budget, and then if for some reason our guests show up, we might take a pause, because the budget is a multimedia, meeting, sorry, English language is tough, and it's the best one I got. Multi-meeting discussion topic, so we'll go as much as we can. So, Dr. Starfin
Yep.
and Ms. Conley-Abram?
Mr. President, trustees, at the February 27th regular board meeting, the district's chief financial officer, Nicole Conley-Abram, provided an overview of the preliminary fiscal 2013 budget. This preliminary budget was based on board guidance provided at the January 9th board work session about the elements for the fiscal 2013 budget. Attached for your information are a few pieces of material that I just wanted to make sure that the public, for those who aren't sitting here, can hear. You have a timetable, a timeline for a special election to ratify school taxes. It's a back to front, page 3 and 4 of behind your tab. You also have the fiscal forecast that was presented before on January 9th at your work session. If you flip into that at around page 28, I do believe, yes, 26. There's the human capital and compensation piece that was presented on February 27th that has a few pages within it as well. But the point for highlighting those, and Oscar, am I able to pull those up on TV? Yep. Just so that people know, I just wanted to, you might want to dog ear these pages so you can kind of go back and forth to them. Under the compensation piece outlined on page 17 behind the tab, and it's also what we would say slide 2. Keep going backwards, Mr. President. Yep. You might want to dog ear that page because that just outlines the options and the cost. So it's a pretty quick snapshot for you to look at. We also thought that on page 20, and that is slide 15, it shows the projected additional revenue based on, the cent increase. So that just outlines that for you. And the pros and cons are outlined on page 21, which is slide 16, on the opposite page from that. So you might want to see that. And Oscar, y'all are on the wrong page on the screen for TV. So it's in the brownish, go backwards on your slides. And while they're sorting that out, I'll just go ahead and help the board dog ear a couple of other pages. And then, like I said, beginning on page 26, you have the beginning of the human capital compensation one. But if you look on pages 28 and 29, similar information, but this one outlines on page 28 the 1 and 2 year compensation strategy. So, and then you have, again, the increases. So it's in both presentations. Might be easier for you to follow as you go back and forth in your discussion. Now, at our meeting on in January, we put out a couple of options for the board to consider, and as the preliminary budget was built, we built it without or no change in the M&O tax rate. But just to remind you of the options we put on the table, we were first in option 1, could include in the preliminary budget a one-time payment that's equivalent to a 3% salary increase for all full and part-time employees. A permanent compensation increase would be contingent on a successful TRE. If the TRE were not successful, the cost of the first year of compensation increase would be covered by drawing down on the district's fund balance, and that the salary increase would not be permanent. And for this option, it is recommended that the TRE be called for November 2012. In option 2, if the TRE were called for June or November of 2013, the same scenario as option 1 would occur in fiscal year 13 with a one-time equivalent of a 3% salary increase provided and paid with fund balance. In addition, the preliminary fiscal year 14 budget would also include a one-time payment that would be equivalent to a 3% salary increase for all full and part-time employees. A permanent compensation increase would therefore be contingent on a successful TRE. This option would allow for a possible 2-year bridge to seek a permanent solution. The second one-time payment would require another drawdown from fund balance to cover the cost of the second one-time compensation increase unless a TRE was ratified by voters. This would be the last one-time payment available by drawing down the fund balance. If a TRE were not successful, salaries would remain at fiscal year 10 salary levels. And then in option 3, prepare the fiscal year preliminary budget without contemplation of a salary increase, thereby not making any kind of commitment at this time. Now, at the January work session, for those trustees that were present, the majority of the discussion was really held by or with 7 trustees. And our read as an administration was that you were generally supportive of the first option, and that was to seek a TRE in November 2012 in order to fund a salary increase. But we have no closure on the subject just yet because there are other things I'm sure the board may want to think about and consider, especially how many pennies or cents we would want to actually increase. This evening, the administration is seeking any additional guidance you want to provide on whether or not to include a salary increase in the fiscal year 2013 budget. Now, like Mr. Torres said, the calendar committee is anticipating that tonight's discussion, which is scheduled for about an hour, would probably not be enough. You'd want to think about stuff, give us a chance to take it back as an administration, perhaps work it over a little bit and bring it back to you again. So you are scheduled for another discussion later this month. And to be clear, what was presented at the fiscal year 2013, or what is in the preliminary budget that you saw on February 27th, again, we assumed no change in the M&O tax rate of $1.079, but included a $14.2 million provision to provide all employees with a one-time payment equivalent to a 3% increase funded from reserves. Now, without substantially increasing reserves, this action can only be sustained with, for 1 year. To effectuate a permanent raise for employees, the district would need to increase revenue by a minimum of $14.5 million. And you can look again on your sheet. Nicole, could you go to page 29 or slide 4? The next slide. Right. In order to get there, you can see that it would require a tax rate increase of at least 4 cents, and that would generate about $15.6 million. So this is, just, again, pulling everything together that you've kind of had thus far, summarizing, where you've been and where we are today, and seeking any guidance on how much, if we really do want to try to move forward for November, and any other strategies that you'd like for us to pull together in preparation for your next discussion later this month. Mr. President, this concludes our presentation. Of course, our CFO, along with your superintendent, is available to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you all very much. So I'm going to separate. I think there's at least a couple parts, one of which is we have the preliminary proposal. And as you indicated, it includes a 3% increase in pay, but not sustainable absent a tax increase. But I want to make sure that to the board, as part of this, whether there's any questions about the proposal as it is before we get to the TRE and the comp. For some reason, that over the last week, if somebody has come up with any questions that need to be asked of staff, or any particular items that they're in that they're not sure what they understand, or they think that are out that maybe we ought to be considering. Does anybody have any questions about the budget before we get into the TRE discussion? That's obviously the meat about where we need to go, but still we've got a $700 million operating budget that I want to make sure that the questions are getting asked. And obviously there'll be multiple chances for conversation. Okay, so if there's not, we'll come back, and you certainly can submit those as we go forward. Let's talk about the TRE, and we got a lot of pages that were dog-eared there about the comp strategy. And with respect to, what is the comp strategy? What are the implications on a TRE? Are those two connected? Do we need a TRE for things other than comp? What's the timing of a TRE? And what are the other factors that we have to consider if we're going to, in terms of what the timing of the TRE would be? And what we know is that beginning in January will be another biennium session of the legislature. We know that we're in an even year. In November is a presidential election year, so very high turnout. We also know that there's other taxing jurisdictions that are looking at doing some things as well. And how does all that fit together, and what's the public pulse on all of this? So there's some challenging things I don't know that we know all the answers to, that we need to get some more information. But let's open up for comments, questions, observations, or opinions about kind of the comp strategy. Let me make a proposal first. Is there anybody that and I appreciate you putting the compensation increase in for the staff of 3%, whether we pay it from reserves year one, or we're able to fund it long-term out of a TRE. Are people comfortable with that as a component of the preliminary budget? Does anybody think for some reason we should be doing something different than a, fiscal 12, 13, 3% increase? No, we still got to figure out how to pay for it long-term. Dr. Stefan?
Yeah, it's just equivalent to.
Roughly, it's equivalent to, right. Because of the way the salary structures work, which is that,
Right, it's not yeah, we don't.
it's a one-time payment.
There you go.
It's a stipend. Yeah, it's a 3% stipend, basically, I guess is what it would maybe a better way. Is that the wrong terminology? Bonus,
But the point,
one-time payment, however we call it.
yeah, but the point is to really differentiate between raising our salaries versus doing a one-time equivalent to a 3% increase that only happens for 1 year. So we just want to be clear that by doing it, which we have baked into the preliminary budget, would not commit us to out-year salary increases. And that's how it's structured in the preliminary budget. The only way you could have the out years is that you generate a permanent funding stream, which would have to be tied to a tax ratification election.
So just to make sure, maybe I'm the only one, to understand how this will be effectuated next year, would it be that we would, because we won't know about a TRE until November at the earliest. So would people's pay be raised 3% either way at the beginning of the school year? And then or would we wait if we decide, because we won't know the TRE until November, or will the pay increase not take place until we just find out the results of a TRE? Or if there's no TRE, how would we actually make the payment?
Right, so I think when we initially discussed the options, we were looking at a one-time payment, which would be effectively a 13th payment that would occur, I think we said the January time frame, Mr. Hauser. And so, so we're not adjusting salaries. The salary schedules will stay the same,
Okay.
but we'll create an additional one-time payment. And so if we had the election results, certainly we would have to, Michael would have to, Mr. Hauser would have to sort of talk about how we could go back and implement that across the salary schedules. Which would mean that we'd have some retro activities that we would have to effectuate.
Okay.
But right now, we're structuring it as if it's a 13th payment.
Some point during the school year, and then if in January, and then if there is a TRE and if it passes, then we'd figure out how do we catch up?
We
and
would probably
increase based
adjust the
on-
salary schedules and then effectuate some kind of retroactive payment for
Okay.
the prior months.
I'll quit talking. So questions, comments, thoughts on this item at this point? Okay, so let me make sure. So is there anybody that thinks that either a 1-point time payment or the 3% increase that's the proper planning assumption, because that's what's baked into the preliminary budget? Okay? Everybody okay with that? Okay, and then, so now the question is, do we want to try to look at a TRE, and if so, for how much, for when? So thoughts on a TRE? Ms. Snyder?
I have a question about basically before we go for a TRE. And do we have a list of the things that we've gone through to try and save money that would save us, real-time big money, about the kind of stuff that we're talking about to raise the salaries?
Mr. President, trustees of the board, trustee Schneider, yes, we have documented that, and it's provided within the preliminary budget. We have a summary of what we've done over time for the budget reductions, and it also outlines how, within the preliminary budget, how we built up the reserves and how we would continue to build up the reserves.
Okay. All for building up the reserves. I think we're really going to need it after the next legislative session comes forward. But could you help me out and show me where in the budget process this is, or where in the budget documents that we've got this and the kind of dollars that we're talking about?
Sure. Nicole, do you have those materials in front of you to be able to talk through, or can you do it? I don't have all
So I don't have the materials in front of me. We have published it as part of our official budget for the current year. There's a list of all the accumulated savings. I can speak to some of which, of course, is associated with the reduction in force that we had put into place, which helped us realize close to $29 million in savings, as well as $13 million from over the 2 years from restructuring our health plan. And a lot of it has been associated with reductions over the time. You know, we started out in fiscal year 2010 and fiscal year 2011 in sort of implementing centralized reductions. So we've been reducing over the last 3 years. You're talking cumulatively over the last 3 years of austerity planning. Also, in the preliminary 12-13 budget, we have some proposed offsets that are associated with phasing out of our career ladder. We have some supplemental components that are coming, that are sort of phasing out over time. We're assuming some projected salary lapse with results of our freeze efforts that has been into place over the last 2 years, and maximizing some other revenue sources associated with our bottom line. That's about $8.5 million. And we also expect our compensation levels to go down. This year we had an increase built in for those actions associated with the RIF, so we would expect those to sort of reduce in next year. We also have seen some better efficiency in some of our tax appraisal freeze. They haven't been spending as much, so that's about $500,000. And then over the course of the 3 years, cumulatively, we're looking to hoping to realize at least about $1.5 million in energy and efficiency savings to help us sort of mitigate some of the costs associated with the possible tax rate increases over the energy program. So it's a number of various options, the bulk of which are associated with our reduction in force, as well as the complete sort of restructuring of our health plan with regards to both basically changing the plan design as well as the contribution levels in the plan.
And the total that we're talking about is roughly?
It's close to $67 million over the 3 years that we've been implementing various reductions, cost avoidance, and it's cost avoidance, savings associated with not experiencing additional expenditures due to our preemptive and protective efforts to sort of not experience those expenditures, as well as actual budget reductions.
Do we have identified savings that we have not chosen to implement for whatever reason?
I would say that the only thing, and I'm just thinking back to the MGT study that highlighted some opportunities with regards to savings, the bulk of which is associated with, closures of schools. And I think we've had $7 million, but we did realize some efficiencies in terms of optimizing our building space. But there were no sort of high dollar value. I mean, we didn't want to cancel pre-K, which is, I'm sorry?
Pre-K and second planning period.
Right, so we didn't want to implement not doing pre-K in the second planning period, which when we did the vote for the community, folks valued those particular expenditure items, and so we didn't make those reductions initially. So there wasn't a lot of opportunity when you sort of took out those high dollar recommendations out of the efficiency study. The biggest piece was on the health, which I think we've pretty much fully realized most of those savings, even though we didn't necessarily subscribe to the recommendation, which is to go into TRS. But we did sort of did some of the recommendations, like eliminating the Office of High School Redesign, restructuring some of our stipend payments. We eliminated tactical compensation. So we did a fairly sizable portion of the recommendations out of that efficiency study, plus some with regards to our efforts to realize more efficiency in energy management.
Nicole, just about reassess the $300 million of programming.
Yes, I'm reminded that we did a program review. We looked at about almost nearly 200 individualized programs. Our Office of Accountability, we performed a survey with all our administrators to look at programming to see whether or not it was effective and whether or not they would make recommendations to either sustain the program or give up the program in order to balance the budget. And that, again, resulted in additional reductions in elimination of various programs. Some of which sort of were ultimately effectuated as part of the RIF and the restructuring actions that have occurred over the last 2 years.
And do we have a list of those that's available?
Yes, we do have a list of those.
Could you provide that
Sure.
to the board, please?
We provided, Mr. President, trustee of the board, we actually presented it to the board in an earlier board meeting about this time. Was it last year? It's all a blur. I think it was around this time. Those materials are attached to one of the various board meetings that are already public, so people in the public can see it, and we can provide another copy for the whole board, the printout of all the analysis. But I know y'all see a lot, but you'll remember it was like a 4-quadrant document. It had sort of high outcome student achievement, and we looked at is fidelity good? So it might be a great program, but we haven't been really doing it with fidelity, or it's a program that is much liked but doesn't really serve a lot of students, and we have no evidence that it actually makes a difference. And you may remember it, but if not, we have all that analysis.
Okay. Well, I just think that we're going to need to be pretty thorough in our documentation of what we've actually tried to do to save money before we go out and do anything, whether it's this or any other thing that we put on the ballot for folks. And I know that the perception, at least in my part of the world and the public, is that we still haven't done a whole lot. So it may be just a lack of documentation. It may be just a lack of getting the word out. But I think that if we do this, we need to do it the right way, and part of that right way is making sure that we get the message out.
Okay. I'm going to jump into something you said about our program evaluation, and there was dollars associated with it. I think as you look at that, Nicole, if there's something you can explain about what's incremental programs versus embedded, because I know we talk a lot about program evaluation, but sometimes it's what our teachers are doing. And if we stop doing that program, that doesn't mean all of a sudden there's a lot of savings. That's just it's really an effectiveness issue rather than an efficiency issue. We're not going to save a lot of money if we stop doing the program, because they have to do something. They have to teach reading to English language learners. What's the most effective program? Some of the programs that are incremental are funded by federal Title I grants or other grants. It's incremental money that's very much associated with a particular program, where we really got to figure out if we're using the right programs and if it's getting the effect. But because of the cuts, I think, over the past year, we've really carved away a lot of the other softer stuff that's not in the classroom, not transportation, not hardcore, got to happen to run the business. But as we can kind of look at that, maybe it's also not only what we've cut, but some way to picture what we have left, so that we can try to say that we really are lean as we do our benchmarks, which I know you've done, about the efficiency of the general administrative expenses and maybe other comparisons. I think sometimes it's, people want to see the pain, which we've done through the RIF. They want to make sure that you're lean. And then the things that I think you went through and listed about the things that we've effectively taken off the table for 12-13, about additional reductions in force, school closures, we want to keep pre-K, we want to keep second planning period, we're not changing health care. But those may be things that we have to look at 13-14 after the legislative session, because we don't know where we're going to shake out. And so some things that we really don't ever want to cut, we may end up having to put back on the table. Other questions or comments? Ms. Torres.
Mr. Williams, to speak to the question that you asked, I think one of the things that I would like to see that we add, in addition to what Mr. Snyder has said with regard to the documentation of the years of work that we put into savings directed by the board, beginning with the MGT study and the work that's gone on in the past 2 years. One of the important things that's going to be extremely critical is a significant education piece, and I think Ms. Barksdale can probably speak to how difficult it is to explain a subject as complicated as the budget, as complicated as the events that went on during the last legislative session and how politically charged some of those things can be, and how we try and educate the community to the position that we're in so that they see things the way we see things with regard to our staff and our limits on the options that we have. And so I would welcome certainly suggestions from Ms. Barksdale as to how do we thoughtfully educate yet not cross the line to to lobby, if you will. I know trustees can certainly lobby, but in terms of the district, who holds all the cards in terms of the information and the education, this is going to be require a very thoughtful education piece to try and have the average voter understand that this isn't just a tax increase, that this is our livelihood in terms of our only options for increasing funding. I am certainly supportive of us trying to go out and going for a tax increase. I would probably think, at least at this point in time, I'm comfortable for something at around 4 or 5 cents. Somewhere, $100 a year seems to be a number that when you break it down on a monthly basis, and I think that's what we need to do, is how much of an effect is it on the average taxpayer on a monthly basis. I think it's easy for folks to understand that more than perhaps all 9 cents or 11 cents, whatever the amount is, because I think all of a sudden that just seems like a large number, the perception to some people. But I think the most critical thing in my mind is a well thought out, well developed education piece that has some focus groups of average citizens before we send it out to the average person, so that we know it's not the way we see it, it's not the way staff sees it, it's how does the average person see it when we start presenting something like this to them.
Okay, very good, thank you. Ms. Barksdale.
Well, sort of to that point, I have just a larger question. It's more of a philosophical or strategic question about human capital, and that is what is the district's plan for attracting and retaining the best and the brightest in the field, without having compensation be part of that approach? But we need the community to be partnership in that. I think that having compensation be part of attracting and keeping the best and the brightest makes perfect sense. And to your point, others may not think so, but others may think that you just kind of stick around and do a job, for whatever reason, even if you have other options. And as the economy improves, a lot of our educators and staff will certainly have many other options. But from a philosophical standpoint, how do we attract and retain the best and the brightest without some commitment to compensation improvement? Or can we?
And
I would-
yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry. Dr. Christopherson.
Mr. President, Trustee Barksdale, I would say not. I mean, it's, you have in here, we posted it for the public, how we rank against, and I know urbans are the big urbans, but the closest big urban to us is 3 hours away in either direction. So really what is more sobering than anything is the regional competition. And as Mr. Williams points out all the time, and I'm sure he will before the night's over again, we have far less flexibility. So every time we do something, others are right on our heels and have more flexibility in their pennies than we do. And so, but it's not everything. I mean, compensation isn't everything. At least, and y'all know this, we've been working with a national organization to look at, school climate and district climate and the things that are important to our employees. And, kind of in order, but not perfect order. I mean, our teaching staff says more about like wanting high quality leaders as principals in their schools. And that does a lot for improving the working conditions. and working conditions, that, having resources for your classroom, being able to have a manageable class size. I mean, people aren't asking for the moon and stars, but those are things, the working conditions weigh heavily on them as well. And compensation is important. It's not ranked at the top. We hardly ever see research that says, hands down, except for if you give, and I think the research was showing, we were going over this in our senior cabinet, if you give a 10% increase, that does make a difference for student achievement, and it does actually make more of a difference for staff. But until you kind of hit that level of a one-time, as one big step in an increase, there's not as much bang for your buck in that area. So it has to be a multi-pronged strategy. It's compensation plus better working conditions, plus resources for the classroom, plus good leadership in the school that kind of helps keep your talent and recruit talent. But unless we're doing something super significant, we have to have that multi-pronged strategy.
Just to follow up on that, but compensation is a part of that.
It's a part of it.
And we have significant competition regionally, as you pointed out. So again, I guess the position the district is in is needing the community to be a partner in understanding that strategy and progressing that strategy. So the overall total compensation, total retention strategy, so.
And just to your, and a little bit to, kind of further flush out your, the conversation. Yeah, and that's why, like, for the TRE, yes, we certainly want to think about compensation, but I think, we have to speak also to the things that the community and staff know are best for their kids. So one concept, like moving from this tax testing orientation to whole child development. So we're working with the Kennedy Center, and we're one of, I think, 7 districts in the country that were tapped to be part of their fine arts assessment and ways to shape your fine arts so that any given child, that's the tagline, any given child has access to the arts. So we'll have great information about arts in schools. They've been able to track it to achievement, where we have inequities, and so on. So as part of what we think about for the tax ratification election, we probably, and I understand for compensation, we might be at one number, but are we looking to support the kind of programs and things that are important for enhancing not only the working condition, but the quality of the educational experience for children? So, so in our world, there's sort of 2 big other buckets outside of compensation that we know matters and is making a difference for kids. And Nicole, I kind of highlighted it in my letter at the beginning of the preliminary budget. So one was around fine arts and using the research that we're getting from the Kennedy Center, and then the second one.
Was it literacy?
What?
Was it literacy in early childhood?
Oh, it's full, taking the guesswork out of every year around full day pre-K. Because every year, until something is solidified, we go back and forth about whether or not that's something that we can find permanent funding for. So we always talk about it, we always have to balance it against all the other needs, but is that something we want to commit to with our taxpayers? And that was tied to the elimination of the achievement gap. We just know that it was kind of twofold. It was like elimination of the achievement gap and advanced learning for kids who, come to the table and get another lift out of being in early childhood. So those were 2 other areas where we know that either you're eliminating achievement gap or you're really enhancing the educational experience for the child, or in the case of, fine arts, it helps with so many other things like behavior and development and offering a more balanced, round educational, program. So while I know compensation is one piece of it, we know that there are other things that if by working with the child actually has an outcome or a benefit that makes the teaching experience and the educational experience for both the child and the teacher better. And so we're trying to get the short list of those, and I will only probably be able to bring you those where we've been able to really assess and feel like we can land on some hard numbers for y'all to be comfortable with if you were to consider the, you know, a TRE design based on something other than compensation. And so I know, Nicole, you were talking to educational resource strategies about a couple of things that we do, like the second planning period. What was another area we were looking at with them? I have a lot on my mind, but I remember being.
Well, we were looking at sort of how could we build a sort of multi-year human capital strategy that's competitive, and could we fund it internally? Is that cost prohibitive? Or what if we couldn't fund it internally through either reallocation of the planning period or whatever revenues that were remaining on the pennies? What could be solutions to what is the gap? And so in that way, it's like what you spoke about, Trustee Barksdale. What is the sort of public-private partnership that we would have to establish with the Austin community to really fund a human capital strategy that's competitive and innovative and cutting edge? Because we could find that we do have some possible models that we could utilize extrapolating from our REACH program, but what would that mean if we scaled it system-wide, and what are sort of the cost implications of that, and what could we really do with our remaining pennies as well as our internal reallocations to really fund that? Is it feasible? And if not, what's the gap that we would have to sort of begin to have with our external partners to help us really solidify a human capital program that makes sense for Austin?
Thank you. Other questions or comments on this item? Ms. Moya.
I understand that the value of the second planning period is somewhere between $7 and $9 million. And have we, and you may just need to refresh my memory, if we have actually had some type of a conversation with staff on this, asking them as far as, what is more valuable to them, the second planning period or an increase in pay. And because I think that particular item is going to come down to something like that, because it does have good value as far as being able to change our salary structure and be more competitive in the region. But staff would definitely need to be on board with something like that. So I was just wondering, because I'm not recalling right now what we've done in the past on this and what we're planning to do in the future.
So, Mr. President, Trustee Moya, and Nicole might want to add a little bit more to this, but the last year was our first full year with doing comprehensive budget surveys. So even in the face of significant reductions, our secondary staff was very committed to the second planning period. And research does show that when you use the time wisely, using best practice strategies, and some best practice strategies that we still don't quite have our arms around, like differentiated instruction and some other things that I talked to y'all about in the retreat this weekend, basically we know that the structure that we have is pretty solid. And we've even, this group, the Educational Resource Strategies, when we saw them, they came in with Educate Texas, the conference last week. And we spoke extensively about what they're seeing around the country. And the bottom line is we have the right, a good structure. Nothing, it's pretty costly, but if we used it well, it could really benefit us probably more than what we're getting out of it right now. But it would require a renewed commitment to using the time that we have in ways that really benefit the learning of staff, and most importantly, are tied to those things that are going to get us the biggest bang for our buck in student outcomes. And we've had lots of assessment. We've even assessed our own staff in this way, and the TEL survey shows a lot of that. Teachers and staff told us directly about their concerns. They like the time, wish they had more of it. The way it's being used isn't quite as tight as it could be. So we could do a lot around tightening our guidance, giving them more evidence and examples of that best practice research, and that's not where we've been spending, our time in this area. But it has taken last year's budget work plus the recent last year's analysis of the TEL survey. We get another one coming this year. And so that, coupled with a couple of other diagnostic assessments we have coming in, I think we'll have a solid recommendation for, if we're going to keep it, how to really make it worth it. And that's before I would recommend, eliminating it altogether. I do think we need to try to make those midstream adjustments and see, before we change the whole structure. It has a lot of good potential, and we've been able to triangulate it 3 different ways that we just haven't done it as well as we could, and that does require that at the school site level, both teachers and leadership work closer toward those best practice designs. And that's not something we've apparently been spending our time doing with the time that we have in that second planning period. Some schools, yes, not all, and not consistently enough to get the lift for the kids who certainly need it.
Okay, let me make sure there's somebody, I'll come back to you. Is there anybody else? Questions? Ms. Barksdale?
I appreciate that question. But it sounds like the second planning period is part of that intense, or not intense, but yet professional development piece that you've been so diligent about presenting to us on a regular basis with regard to educator quality. That professional development is a huge part of that, consistent and quality professional development. And it sounds like what I'm hearing is a multi-pronged approach for human capital, which is the professional development, compensation, and other things. But for now, what's on the table is funding that compensation, and I do support doing that as soon as possible with the November 12 TRE to at least lock that piece in a multi-year way, so we don't have to revisit it again.
Other questions or comments on this item? Okay, I think this is going to be an ongoing conversation. Dr. Stafford alluded to, which I will say again, this is, I think, a challenge because our tax rate, the O&M rate, is at $1.79. All the other Central Texas districts are $1.04. So we can't win the price war. If we go up 3 cents, 5 cents, they can go up 5 cents and still be right there with us. We have the challenges of FICA, obviously. I think our staffing levels, partly because of our demographics and our needs, are different. We've tried to get a lot of that out of the MGT studies. But in some ways, we're going to have a tough time competing. And so I don't know if I'm saying this for the benefit of Michael, is sort of the human capital strategy. When you think about the old, I think, which was very effective, the compensation framework that was developed many, many years ago that you did, which was great, which was the salaries, benefits, working conditions, and professional development. And almost a scorecard of where do we stand on all those, so we understand that on some of these we may be below, which I think we'll probably be, sadly, on compensation, particularly net take-home cash pay for a long time. But can we make sure that the other quadrants, that we're on the top side of those things where we can affect it, that we've got the right benefits, we've got the right working conditions, and working conditions, are things which I think second planning period comes into play because it affects staffing levels, or it affects time and the supports that we provide our people, and the recognition and the climate and all those things that I think we're going to have and then professional development and professional growth for our people. So I think we have to make sure that and I'm hopefully building on what you're saying, Ms. Parks, is that compensation is a component, but it can't be the only component. And we may make a move in comp, but that doesn't mean all of our fellow districts don't make that same move, and then we've negated the impact of it. So how do we make sure that at the same time we're investing on the other variables as well so that we can move the ball? And if it's part of the planning process, some of those other variables may not cost as much as a percentage pay increase, but actually may get us a higher bang in terms of our ability to retain people who are already with us. And not sure what the impact would be about, recruiting new people who come in maybe more on a base salary component, but we certainly want to keep our best. Okay, one other thing I do think, and we talked about is this conversations is with the other taxing jurisdictions. I mean, we're talking November 12, but there's a lot of stuff potentially on the ballot in our region on 12, and I think we need to understand all of that, because this election, this potential TRE is not going to be done in isolation. You know, so we need to understand what all those other things are and what's the likelihood of the impact of those. At this point, that may be some external group that we have to help us figure that out and work with the community group to take the lead. And I think Mr. Torres' point about getting some people that might be able to help step up with us and give us some feedback. But we've also got to realize that there may be a lot of demand for tax dollars in November, and the attention because of the November presidential election is going to be a little bit tougher to get. So our ability to communicate and educate our public about this, particularly people who aren't paying attention, might be much tougher in a November election. So, and this is confusing and complex, so people's initial public opinions might be shaped on that. Okay, that's what I've got. I think there's a lot of work, so I know the conversations are continuing. And I see that we've got our CBOC outside, so if you guys are okay, let's move to that agenda item. Everybody okay with that? Okay, thanks, Nicole. Great work as always. Dr. Christopher, thank you. Really important. Oh, are we going to 7 first?
Yeah, it's number.
Okay. So, yeah, I see Mr. Hawkins. So who's coming in first, Paul? Lawrence? The SIPAG or the? CBOC?
CBOC. Oh,
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's bring in, I did see Mr. Cumberbatch, Mr. Jenkins, Mr. Fryer, lots of misters. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you. As we probably don't do enough, but thank you in advance for all the work you do. Thanks to your committee, and we'll thank you at the end. But very, very important duty, and we appreciate y'all taking your time to help the district and our students. Dr. Starton, you kicking it off?
Yes. Mr. President and trustees of the board, consistent with its charge, twice a year in March and in October, the board appointed Community Bond Oversight Committee, the CBOC, submits a report to the Board of Trustees on the status of the 2004 and 2008 bonds. Tonight, we have the co-chairs of the CBOC, Mr. Ashton Cumberbatch and Mr. Bobby Jenkins, who have returned once again to make an oral presentation summarizing the committee's recently submitted written report to the board. As is customary, the report will cover the overall financial and schedule status of bond programs, including projections on the use of contingency funds and site acquisition efforts. Other topics to be covered are the bond program's historically underutilized business, the HUB, program, communications, safety, sustainability, and technology initiatives. Additionally, this evening's report will include comments regarding the recently completed customer satisfaction survey that the CBOC conducts each year for completed capital projects. I look forward to this semi-annual report, as I have in every year. It's so invigorating, and the opportunity for y'all to be able to discuss the progress that's being made in the district's capital improvement bond programs. And just on behalf of the Austin Independent School District's administration, we want to thank the public for supporting our bonds. We want to thank Nicole Conley-Abram for selling those bonds, and for y'all, for all the monitoring and work that you've done. I've seen you work tireless hours, so just really appreciate it and welcome.
Welcome. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to report. First, let me say, as you know, this is, as Superintendent stated, this is the overview of the progress of the 2004 and 2008 bond programs. Our last report was given in October of 2011. You should have a copy of the written report as well as a slide deck which summarizes the written report, and I'll be going through the slide deck. After I finish, we'll be glad to take any questions that you might have. Should also mention that both reports can be found at the Apple at Work website. Let's see, I'd like to thank my fellow CBOC members as well as the staff for their great assistance to us. Without them, we really would not be able to present to you. Beginning with slide 1, you can see that Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the 2004 bond reports, bond programs. Phase 1 included 91 projects, and they're all complete. Phase 1 of the 2004 bond report comprised almost half of the dollar value of that program. Phase 2 includes 69 projects, and all but 2 of those are complete. The ongoing projects include the Southeast Bus Terminal, which I believe you all are very familiar with, as well as the construction of the soccer fields. The bus terminal, just briefly, is located in the area of Bluff Springs Road and William Canyon. And it's allows, well, staff pursued several options to gain a roadway easement from an adjacent property owner that will provide the district with vehicle access from the bus terminal site to the northbound service road of I-35. And the board approved the district's entering into a roadway access easement agreement with the adjacent landowner to provide that access. The owner of the adjacent property has agreed in principle to granting a non-exclusory roadway easement at no cost to the district and to reimburse AISD for 1/3 of the cost to construct the roadway, contribution not to exceed $300,000. The district has been granted a right-of-way to the road access property to perform its due diligence work and begin the design of the roadway. On November 21st of last year, the board approved the final guaranteed maximum price for the project in the amount of $6.8, and the construction manager is presently performing the site clearing and evacuation work and installing the site utilities. Project completion date is estimated to be December of 2012. The soccer fields, it's a joint use project with the City of Austin, located at Parkland in the Oak Hill neighborhood. It's a 12.6 acre park located on Southwest Parkway, about 1.5 miles west of the intersection of 290 and Mopac. Let's see, Austin Parks and Recreation has offered this site to the district for construction of a single competition-level soccer field, as well as parking lot, restrooms, concession facility, and a secondary practice and play area field. If you have any questions while I'm going, that's fine with me as well, as opposed to waiting till the end.
Make that more interactive. We like it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. AISD staff, attorneys for the district, and city legal are currently working on the interlocal site use agreement that will allow the soccer facilities to be constructed on the parkland. And once the agreement is finalized, which is anticipated to be later on this month or early April, it will require approval of the board as well as the city council. All 63 projects in Phase 3 are complete or substantially complete, including Goritsky Middle School, renovations and additions at Benechek and Webb Middle School, Lanier High School, and Baker Administrative Center, as well as the construction of the House Park Fieldhouse. In Phase 4, there are currently 26 projects. 25 are substantially complete and 1 is ongoing. The new North Central Elementary is one of the 2 undesignated elementary schools. This school will be located on the Rock Hollow Lane near the intersection of East Frundsburg and North Creek Drive. There's a schematic design phase in place, which you all approved on January 30th, and it's proceeding with preparation of the final design and bid documents. And then lastly, in Phase 5, there are currently 13 projects, and all are substantially complete. All right, 2008 bond program, 4 phases. In Phase 1, there are 41 projects, which represents about 80% of the total dollar value of the 2008 bond program. New construction projects include the Early Childhood Center for Lindeer Elementary Relief, the Performing Arts Center site, and a new cold storage warehouse, which is now complete and materials are being delivered, and the conversion of the existing cold storage warehouse to a dry warehouse space. There are also 3 elementary school classroom additions at Barrington Elementary, Hart Elementary, and Lanford Elementary, and all 3 of those additions are complete. 22 renovation projects that include improvements to roofs, kitchens, electrical systems, and HVAC systems and restrooms. There are 33 projects which are complete or substantially complete, including 6 power factor correction projects. The 6 power correction projects are on hold pending direction on an implementation from Austin Energy, and 2 are ongoing. And then, of course, there's a new Performing Arts Center. Site acquisition and early design is in process. The schematic design was approved by the board on January 30th. And the new Early Childhood Center, the final guaranteed maximum price was approved on June 20th of last year by the board, and construction is scheduled to be complete by July of this year. In Phase 2 of the 2008 bond project, there are 25 projects. 19 of those projects are complete or substantially complete. As I mentioned before about the 6 power factor correction projects are on hold. In Phase 3, there are 13 projects. All 13 were completed during the summer of 2011, prior to the start of the 2011-2012 school year. All right. As far as bond contingency, you recently received update number 65 of the bond program contingency report, which is represented in the graph that's depicted on the screen. Let's see. Group 1 contingency need is estimated to be about $2.3 million, which is well below the allocated contingency of $18 million, leaving a balance of about $15.6. The remaining balance can be attributed to the, and I skipped over a second, I'm sorry. I skipped over and I was now talking about 2008 bond contingency. So let me just finish with that, then I'll go back to 2004. The remaining balance for 2008 can be attributed to the current competitive construction pricing. At this time, it appears that there's no contingency funds that will be needed to address 2008 Phase 2 projects. Phase 3 project designs and bids have been completed. On January of this year, the board approved use of 2008's bond program contingency funds for the implementation of the annual academic facilities recommendations and urgent maintenance projects totaling about $16.1 million. This amount is reflected in the Phase 4 of the 2008 bond program contingency update, and the total remaining contingency amount of about $925,000. It's estimated that as Phases 2 and 3 are completed, these phases will have remaining contingency funds, and the remaining program contingency amount will grow from approximately $925,000. So let me go back for 1 second. Now, a couple more things about 2008. During our last report, you asked us to pay close attention to the utilization and surplus of the 2008 bond contingency funds. At our November 29 meeting, we being the CBOC, unanimously approved the recommendation to the board for the use of surplus contingency for funds for just over $10 million in urgent maintenance work, and you took that in consideration during your January 30th meeting of this year. In addition, a motion was approved stating that a proper needs assessment is to be conducted to determine the high side costs of Go Valley and Ortega Elementary Schools, which would also be marked for use for these contingency funds. The critical renovation projects will affect approximately 34 schools and 1 support facility across the district. The recommendations for the architect and engineer services were approved on February 26th of this year, and as a result, the selected architects and engineers are working on the designs because these projects will be completed this summer in time for the start of the 2012-2013 school year. Any questions on that? Okay. All right. Going back to 2004 for a second. As I mentioned, you received an update, update number 65 of the bond contingency report, which is represented by the current graph. And as you can see, staff reviews contingency as new bids or reviews the contingency as new bids are received and updates represent the actual versus projected contingency needs. Currently, the remaining contingency for the 2004 program is about $2.6 million. And one large project, North Central Elementary, as I mentioned before, is still pending. Any questions about that? Okay. Site acquisition for the 2004 bond program. Property for 5 of the 6 elementary schools have been acquired and construction completed at Clayton, Perez, Blazier, Overton, and Baldwin. In August of 2011, the board approved purchase of 17.7 acre for the North Central Elementary. Property for both the middle school have been, for both middle schools, have been acquired and construction is completed, as I mentioned earlier, Garcia and Gorski. And site of future Southeast Middle School has been purchased. The site of the Southeast Bus Terminal has been purchased and construction, as mentioned earlier, is underway and is expected to be completed in fall of this year. The 2004 bond program was included to acquire, well, I've just mentioned all that, so I think we're good to go there. 2008 site acquisition bond program. Funds were designated for the purchase of the property of the construction for the Performing Arts Center, Early Childhood Relief Center at Lindier, as I mentioned earlier, and the undesignated elementary school and land for a future South High School. The sites for the Early Childhood Center and Performing Arts have been acquired, as you're aware, and as part of the AAFRs, the board approved locating 2008 bond program undesignated elementary school in the north central part of the district to relieve Woolbridge and Cook elementary schools. The board also approved the possibility of an adapted use site for this school because there's not sufficient vacant land available in that area. All right. Now on to the topic of prevailing wage. Construction Management Department continues to keep close watch on the wage rate compliance. To date, there have been 8 inquiries received. When a claim is filed, a thorough investigation is conducted and the appropriate action is taken. 3 random worker surveys have been conducted since our last report to you in October 2011.
And just to say, that's 8 wage rates since 2004, right? Would that be the compliance inquiries?
Say it again, I'm sorry.
So maybe it's a Paul question. Would that be 8 wage rate compliance inquiries since 2004? So really,
yes.
just trying to put context around
Yes,
it. We said
yes.
8, but it's actually, the time frame is
Yes,
over
throughout the whole period of the bond.
8 years, so it's
Yes.
been a very long time. So
Right.
we're not getting very many of these.
No.
Okay, thank you.
The 3 surveys were since
Since
the
the last
last report in October 2011, but, right.
Just want to make sure if anybody was listening, they might, it's a
no.
very small number.
You're right.
Thank you.
Mr. Oh, sorry.
Mr. Cummings?
Cumberbatch, I
Yeah.
have a quick question,
Sure.
just, and maybe this was done before I was here, but on slide 6 in Exhibit B, it says, site of future Southeast Middle School has been purchased. What Southeast Middle School? Paul? Wait.
Just the land for that, but yeah, that's.
Yes,
Good
there
place
was
to
land in the 2004 bond to purchase a site for a future Southeast Middle School.
Site, it's been purchased? Yeah, I mean, did I miss something? I'm just asking. Do y'all remember?
Actually, I think it might have happened before you got here. It's just
So does-
all, I mean, you know the date it was purchased, but I mean,
I don't know off the top of my
I
head.
just heard it
We
was
can-
before you got here.
We can.
Oh, my. Wow,
it's
okay.
southeast of Paris, I believe. Is
It's
that
out, it's next door to Blazier, actually.
Right, so
The site is out there, adjacent to Blazier.
So just,
Elementary.
as I apparently am still learning a lot, when we buy land like that, are we just land banking? Are we, I mean, what if we don't need it?
Well, you could decide at a later time to to go in a different direction. It was included kind of in anticipation of the Goodnight Ranch development, which has been a little bit slow off the mark because of the recession. The number of homes that are going to be built out in that area will probably at some point get us to the place where we need to look at another middle school out there. But how soon that's going to be, we're not exactly sure. It depends on whether that development can get off the ground. And they're still struggling a little bit with the financing of some of that. So whether or not the building is going to pick up rapidly is still kind of up in the air at this point.
So I'd just like to make a request of my team that for the facility master planning and everything that we've been talking about, this site, this issue has been way back on a burner so far back, I've never heard of it. So we might need to bring that forward just to keep our list of these types of things at the forefront, because that seems pretty significant. As we just saw recently, KIP is building 2 schools out there. I mean, this, we really need to, not for building or anything, just managing our information better. And this is one, like I knew all about Linder. Linder, like I feel perfectly clear and understand that that's been in the making, even the 2004 and 8 bonds in North Central. But this one just seems to have disappeared off the face of the earth. So we need to just put that on the list.
Will do. And Paul, just to be clear, that was for land only?
Yes, sir. It's no money to build the school, just for the land.
It has been purchased.
Okay, please continue. Thank you.
Just a couple other things on the prevailing wage. As you mentioned, there, she turned it off. Of the 8 inquiries, 3 were determined to be in compliance, 5 were determined to be out of compliance. And when there is a determination of out of compliance, the district withholds funds from the contract until the matter is settled. All right, the hub update. Let me just mention that you all are probably been updated already by members of the board subcommittee on the hub issue, but we certainly do, as the CBOC, appreciate the board taking this issue seriously and forming a subcommittee. Mr. Jenkins and I had an opportunity to sit in a meeting with trustees Moyer, Bradley, and Guzman. I think it was the early part of February, one Saturday morning.
Like the early part of a Saturday.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
That's
Thank you.
all right. It wasn't that bad at all. We thought it was a very productive meeting. We had met with representatives from the Asian, Hispanic, and African-American contractors, and we had met previously with some of them, but I think it was very helpful for them to meet with you all as well as us. We were also joined by Mr. Waxler and Mr. Fryer. Ms. Conley Abrams was there, as Paul was there, and it seemed to be a very productive meeting. And they wound up taking many of the recommendations that we had previously presented to you all and had some additional recommendations, which we think made the final product a little stronger. The one thing that the CBOC would like to add is that we would like for the trustees and staff to, whatever recommendations can be implemented without the board needing to pass approval, for those to go ahead and be implemented, so there's not a continued delay. There may be some parts of the recommendations the board needs approval, but for those that don't, if those can be implemented post haste, so that as additional products or opportunities come up, that they can take advantage of the new language or new recommendations. I'm sorry?
Are there recommendations? I mean, I know there's a subcommittee.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of any
There
recommendations.
were recommendations from the CBOC originally. We passed them on to the board, or to staff. to
Okay,
the board.
got it. Thank you.
Okay. In addition, let me just mention that overall, about one-fourth, about 24.8%, or $117 million of the $473 and change million in contracts awarded for both of the bond programs has been awarded to historically underutilized businesses, which is comparable to other governmental entities. The CBOC still continues, though, to have concerns about the small amount of participation for African-American businesses. And so we just continue to raise that up to the board, and we're sure with the subcommittee of the board and the board's work, along with staff, that we'll look to see some continued improvement along those lines in the coming months.
And I don't know if y'all have any observations. I mean, y'all, Mr. Guzman, you want to weigh in, at least kind of give folks a perspective?
The 117 million was what percentage?
24, essentially 25%.
25. And does that include non-Hispanic females?
Yes, sir.
And what percentage of that is non-Hispanic?
That's in, it should be in the,
American female as well.
it's not in your slide deck, but it's in your report. If you give us a second, we'll get that number for you. All right, so non-minority female is about 13.
That's the correct word. 13?
About 13, 12.9. All right. Asian Native American, about 2.2. African American, 1.3. Hispanic, 8.4. That's total, yes.
Yeah. And those are just construction, or professional services too.
Right.
You know, and as we were talking about it that Saturday, you know, it's the construction piece that we realize that's where we have a lot of work to do, and that's where a lot of the conversation was with the contractors and the associations and stuff. So I think a lot of our recommendations were reflective of that, and I know that the work that was coming out of that was kind of the focus of it, obviously.
If you look at just, I'm sorry, go ahead, trustee.
You go ahead.
If you look at just the construction part of it, the numbers, non-minority female, 11.4%, Asian Native American, 1.48%, African American, 0.94%, Hispanic, 6.3%.
No, it was just-
And that's through December 2011.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say that I really appreciate the way you brought this whole operation to the forefront in terms of the business that you all do as a committee. I know it's always been there, but I know that in particular now it is at the forefront with staff and with the committee as well, and obviously with the board.
You know, to that point, that has been one of the challenges over the years. I mean, we've looked at these numbers, and they've not moved very much over '04 or the '08 bonds, and so that's where we keep trying to figure out what can we do differently, how can we improve it. And I will say that our subcommittee's done a really good job in taking it very, very seriously and been very diligent in trying to be creative to come up with ways to try and move those numbers. And so I know with y'all's subcommittee, you know, combining those, I think we'll have some opportunity to hopefully move the needle forward a little bit.
Or a lot.
All right, okay. Phase 1 of the Mentor Protege program has ended, but Phase 2, if it hasn't already, will restart soon once selection. Well, I guess it will not restart until you have selected a new hub consultant. As we've mentioned, the CBOC has a subcommittee that's been working on this, and I'd like to recognize the work of Peck Young, Arthur Turner, Jackie Hawkins, and Ricardo Zavala for their efforts and leadership on this hub issue. On the communications side, any more questions on the hub before I move on? Sorry.
Well, it was more in the bond, the actual site acquisitions and those kinds of programming. So can I go back for a second? It's not really there. I just have a question about our athletic fields and things. We go, did I miss that in your presentation?
The only thing I
What was-
mentioned
what
was
was
the
it?
soccer field in South.
And that is the only thing that we have?
As far as the field house at House Park, but as far as 2004, 2008, those are the only two I'm aware of.
Yeah, in 2004, there was renovations to all three, Berger, Nelson, and House, but there was nothing major. We renovated the field houses, and we did we changed the turf at the
Right.
fields, but it wasn't major, and then we put the covered playgrounds on all the elementary schools. But in terms of athletics, it's limited. That's a challenging area to get the public to support. Mr. Turner?
Mr. Williams, you'll remember we did have several joint projects with the city, like the softball field over at Butler, the Kaiser Golf that can be used by all of our golf teams at the high school level. Garrison Park adjacent to Crockett, which has been renovated to be used as a baseball field.
Right.
Did we also do balconies, Mr. Shaw? Northwest. So those were the 4 joint projects that we did in conjunction with the city that were also,
And I hesitate to mention, we also had Turner Roberts as a joint project.
right.
Pardon?
So,
Oh, and the Garcia Tennis, adjacent to Garcia Middle School, the tennis center with the city. That was
That's right.
another joint project.
and just given our student population, what y'all see as demand for athletics and those sorts of things, I mean, how do we rank compared to other districts? This is kind of, I mean, I guess in my mind, having now gotten around Texas a little bit and certainly listening to our coaches and folks talk about what it's like to play in other districts and at other facilities, Austin just seems to be way behind the momentum for athletics and those kinds of extracurriculars. And so, is it that, I mean, kind of what's behind that? It doesn't seem to have a big, we don't have like a really big investment. And when I certainly spend a lot of time with our coaches in our athletics department. It's almost, the best districts seem to have middle school and high school, not just the high school focus. So what is your opinion on what we're doing and not doing in athletics?
Oh, well, I just from an opinion standpoint, happy to chime in. I completely concur with you. You go to House Park or you go to some of the other football stadiums, I mean, it's nice that we've put the artificial turf in, and I think we've received a lot of value on that. And I know before we did that, those fields had gotten so hard, compaction, overuse, we were always going to be behind the 8 ball. So I think that was a big plus, and it's an example of that kind of investment. But, I personally look at House Park as one of the absolute jewels in all of the state of Texas, and really wish there was a will to really improve that facility, because it's a unique facility and one that serves a lot of the district. And our other facilities, the same thing. I mean, we just have not invested in those kinds of infrastructures. Our committee hasn't really spoken about these things. Mostly what we do is take what's been passed and follow each of those projects. But just as a taxpayer and a parent of kids that have gone through the system, it's pretty obvious in my mind that a lot of the AISD facilities are not near on par with just even in Central Texas. I mean, just going to Round Rock or going out to the other areas, Bastrop, there's a lot of facilities that I'm sure those communities are very, very proud of and really serve the community in more ways than just the athletics, as far as a place for the community to gather and support. And that's one of the things that AISD just hasn't seemed invested in enough over time, but that's just the opinion of one of the people on the committee.
And for, at least from my perspective, seeing there's the external, facade of athletics, what you see at a House Park or a Burger and all those kinds of things. But like, once you get into the schools, weight rooms and dressing rooms and practice areas are, I mean, I'm shocked. I think it's far lower in quality than anything I think I've ever seen. I mean, it's, and I challenge anyone to walk through some of our older high schools with the matching feeder middle school. Those dressing rooms, I mean, I know we put a ton of money in, for example, Eastside Memorial recently, but still walking through the rambling, uncoordinated, just seems like it's at least 20 years behind what I've seen in other districts and schools. But I think it's particularly hard on our staff that are in that area or that field as they go and travel and do use locker rooms and things of that sort and come back to what we've invested in, and just, and whether or not y'all think this is something we need to consider for our future bonds.
I would even submit that it's a health and safety issue that we have in many of these facilities. And I, too, have had the opportunity to tour some of them, and, be it the weight room or the dance room, but you go back into the dressing rooms, and it's not a healthy environment. And I know we're trying to do Band-Aids, and, we're trying to get, we didn't have really a lot of bond money for a lot of these things, but we're trying to, kind of piecemeal some minor improvements, but I completely concur that, when you can argue it not just on the value of the athletics itself, but more from a health and safety standpoint, I think that we've got issues as a district that we need to be aware of and need to be willing to take corrective actions to bring those up to standards.
I know that you've got the next committee coming up a little bit later. Historically, I think you're right. The CBOC has really overseen what we've approved. In 2004, there was a separate task force, an athletics task force, that tried to look at what to put in there, but it was a challenge with the perceived support of the public to make the facility improvements, so kind of broader. There's an athletic strategy, which may have facility, program, equipment, staffing, training, all those resources to it. But the facility side was one that we've always struggled with. Can you get enough public support to make them where they need to be, including at a campus level? But you're right. I mean, there's a lot of health and safety issues for a lot of our kids that, and even if it's not just the stuff you see on the ground, which is sometimes scary, it's the space in which they're operating. They're so compact that you worry about kids lifting weights, and we're just sort of fortunate nothing really bad to my knowledge has happened, but you hate to use that as a strategy.
And I guess my only other thing is, like, when I first came here, I went to see Webb. I think it was Webb Middle School's dressing room. We had just put a ton of money in that, and so I know y'all have the survey results, but I was really shocked at the lack of quality in the finish in something we had just spent, I don't know how many millions of dollars on. I think it was like $2 or $3 million in the dressing room areas of Webb. So it's not just the programming piece. It's just sort of, I'm glad that you said it was a little bit of a Band-Aid approach. So we kind of take the same thing, kind of warm it over, and then finish it out where it's just still not at a high quality level. And so it's just an observation that I keep seeing reinforced over and over again. And so I just thought, as part of the monitoring, at least the little that we do, I do think there should be much more oversight of that for the athletics, because it just doesn't seem to turn out as nicely as it should.
Mr. Torres.
Dr. Sarfin, a couple of points I'd like to make. First of all, the survey, the athletic task force that Mr. Williams referred to, for whatever reason, their recommendations when they came to the CBOC and ultimately were part of the bond package, there's always been a challenge in this city because of the fact that we're in the shadows of the University of Texas, that spends an inordinate amount of money on athletics, that perception is that any, yeah. And so consequently, when we go out for a bond,
They didn't hear what you said about the perception, that the UT perception.
that there's a perception that because the University of Texas spends as much money as it does on athletics, that disproportionate amount of money is also spent on athletics within the district. And so the attitude towards passing a tax increase where the University of Texas can fund it on its own and do that and really doesn't have to answer to anyone, the district is not in that position, but it suffers from the perception that that's an issue. The second thing that we had during, once again in 2004, was our science lab facilities were in horrible shape. And you talk about safety issues. I traveled to Crockett, and they did not have a fume hood. They had a fan that was mounted in the window that was their exhaust fan for their fume hood. And so the cost of renovating science labs is extremely expensive. And at the time that we were going through that bond, we were going to have to go to the 4x4, which was coming up, and we needed to prepare for that. And so once again, if you had to weigh in this community whether or not science labs were more important than improvements to athletic facilities, it was a done deal. The final thing, if you'll recall last year when we were going through with the community about how we were to make changes to help address our budget shortfall, if you remember, the area that was the one that was the hardest for us to I would say equitably reduce was athletics. I mean, people felt like, get rid of athletics. Academics is more important. And so there is a perception that, once again, I come back to the educational piece. Athletics is just as important as fine arts and other group activities for our children in the elementary, middle, and high school levels. We have not done a good job to distinguish the difference between K through 12 athletics and college athletics. And being in a town where the University of Texas has a sort of the big elephant in the room, until we do that and show to the public that athletics really is just as important as fine arts in terms of developing the whole child, we're not going to get this community to support any improvements in athletic facilities. And that's what I have found in going through the bond program and trying to support improvements to athletic facilities because of the association that and the perception that people have that spending money on it has the same effect as it does in college.
Okay, on that positive note, Ms. Moya.
I just want to add a little bit to what Mr. Torres was saying, but first, Dr. Karstarfin, thank you for bringing that up because I'm a huge athletics fan and believer in the value it brings to our students from elementary school through high school. And so if we are going to start trying to show the community the value that program brings to our children, I am happy to go out there and tell some stories about children that I know of in all over town, but particularly in District 6, where athletics has made such a significant difference in their life that they are no longer at risk. Their parents come to school and thank the coach for what they've done for their child because the child was going down the wrong road. This particular child is a baseball player, and the child, junior in high school, has told the coach that the coach is the closest thing to a father he has. And those are the kinds of things, that's the impact that our athletics programs and our coaches have on our children. And when you go to some of our schools and there's drainage issues and puddles of water all over the place and weight rooms that are in old shops with big giant fans in the middle of summer where the kids are going to the football players are going to work out in the summer, getting ready for football season, or where they, in some of our newer schools, they've converted from where their weight room was inside, they've moved it outside to an outdoor building with no air conditioning. And so, I mean, we've got such amazing academics, and we've got such amazing staff, and we've got all kinds of wonderful programs and fabulous fine arts, and our athletics facilities on our campuses and those for our general use are in such poor shape. And it says a lot to the families about what we think about what their children are participating in, and it doesn't really feel and look all that great. So I hope that we do something in this area soon, because our programs for athletics should be just as sparkly and shiny as everything else. Thank you.
Mr. Snyder.
I agree also that our athletic facilities need to be upgraded. I mean, my daughter plays basketball. I've been in some of these gyms that you're talking about. My other kids played soccer, and we visited NOAC frequently. But I do disagree, though, on why it is. I mean, comparing this to Eanes or Bastrop or Round Rock, it's like comparing apples and oranges. The real comparison would be comparing us to other urban Chapter 41 districts. And the little exposure I've had to what Dallas offers or Houston offers, we're not all that different. And I think that, if we look at how other folks are funding stuff, that's where to go, is to look at how they're pulling in new athletic facilities or upgrading athletic facilities. Because to go to Bastrop is pointless, basically. I mean, they're not going to have the same challenges that we do, either in terms of their demographic or their funding sources.
So let me just maybe pile on what Mr. Schneider said, though. But there's an adult comparison, which I think you're right, at an intellectual level. But then there's a student comparison, and our kids don't go to play Dallas; they go to Round Rock and Bastrop and Pflugerville, and now we're going to have Lake Travis coming into our district, and that's who they see. And so, like we're dealing with compensation on a regional level, some things you have to deal with regionally, even though the reality is we're much more comparable to the big urbans. That's not the way it really feels to our staff and our students when they are driving and competing against their local communities. And when people have a choice about where to live, when they take their kids, sometimes they're making choices based on those kind of decisions. Mr. Guzman, did you have something?
Just, real quick, I just wanted to echo Mr. Torres's comments with regard to changing the mindset in the community with regards to athletics, because when we were going through the process of cutting or enhancing programs, athletics was the one that was mentioned to me in the community, and they understood. I mean, they loved it and so on and so forth, but if you're going to cut something, cut there. And so we somehow need to, as you say, need to work on that mindset before we're able to get anywhere beyond where we are. Thank you.
So, Ashton, when you were making your thought process about how this conversation would go, did you realize that we had to spend the most time on athletics so far?
We had it penned in.
You're that good. Please continue. Sorry about that. Thank you for indulging us.
No, I think it's fine. I think it's good, and hopefully there'll be some good byproduct that come from this conversation and passed on to the next, whatever the formal name is for your CBAC or pre-CBAC or.
Some of them are behind you.
Yes.
Be careful what you wish for.
I didn't wish for that. All right, talking about communications. There continues to be much activity at the Apple at Work website and the bond hotline. To date, we received requests for email updates of 361. Inquiries submitted through the website, 223. Inquiries submitted through the hotline, 137. Hits to the Apple at Work website, 1.1 million. Outreach efforts include e-blasts, periodic email updates on various topics, including the North Central Elementary School site selection, the Early Childhood Center site selection, the CBOC report to the board, CBOC survey, the new Performing Arts survey, center. as well as the annual report for the combined 2004 and 2008 bond report, which was published in November. In light of the budgetary environment, though, we did go green, and it was only published or broadcast electronically. Now, admittedly, that does pose an issue for some families that don't have access to computers, et cetera, and we'll continue to work with trying to get around that. But we try to be mindful of the costs as far as printing out sufficient copies for close to 80,000 students that you have or families. The performing arts site selection continues to implement a communications, or continues to work on implementing a communications and engagement strategy for development of the new Performing Arts Center, including website updates, e-blasts, and communication with the performing arts stakeholders and neighborhoods in proximity to the site. Surveys, you mentioned those, Superintendent. Beginning in November 2011, surveys were administered, the latest survey was administered, both in hard copy and soft copy, in English and in Spanish, to facilities where major renovations were either in progress or had recently been completed. So those included, for instance, Lanier High School, McCallum High School, Covington Middle School, Small Middle School, Boone Elementary, Go Valley Elementary, Oak Hill, Pleasant Valley, Raleigh Elementary, Sims, and Wooten. A total of 631 total responses were received, which is an average of 48 responses per facility. Survey results and AISD feedback to the public comments are currently being developed and will be posted on the website. Campus-specific results will be posted to each campus's project page, and they will be distributed via email later on this month. I will tell you that we do have a survey subcommittee, and they continue to work on increasing the percentage of folks that respond to the surveys, and as far as getting information out there to individuals about the surveys. Safety update. No accidents were reported through the 5-month survey, 5-month reporting period of August through December. No new student injuries have occurred. As reported previously, we continue to have a rate that's below the national rate. The national rate, as reported by the 2009 Bureau of Labor Statistics for contractors, is 4.2 accidents per 100 employees. The bond contractors for our projects are 2.0, so that's 4.2 compared to 2.0 in 2011, so significantly below the national rate. Talking about sustainability, new construction and major construction or major renovations continue to achieve the district's goal of attaining a 2-star or higher rating from the Austin Energy Green Building Program. The district to date has received a total of $1.3 million in rebates available from Austin Energy for projects such as for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning equipment, enhanced building envelopes, efficient lighting, and custom technologies such as high reflective roofs. The Fine Arts Edition at McCallum received the district's first 5-star rating. I'm sure you all are aware of that. And the Performing Arts Center in the new North Central Elementary School will be the first AISD facility to pursue both the Austin Energy Green Building Program standard, as well as the LEED, the U.S. Green Building Council's Leadership in Energy Environmental Standard rating. So those two facilities we're going for both. Let's see, the technology update. The technology portion of the program is being implemented by the information system staffs, and most of those projects are now complete. As seen in this particular slide, only 2 projects are pending. The schedule for this portion of the project is a 4-year implementation, and we're confident that the advances that these tools will offer will be invaluable to both students as well as teachers and staff. right, well, we are winding down. Recognitions. One, we'd like to take the opportunity to recognize the dedication of our fellow members, as I alluded to earlier. I think across the board, you have some folks who are deeply committed to making sure that this is a relevant and impactful exercise, that is the CBOC's work. We cannot thank our members enough for their contributions. Meeting attendance is consistently good. I would take a moment here to remind the board that Bobby and I are co-chairs, but we were originally slated to be tri-chairs, and I think it might, it might enhance. It might be good, beneficial if we
Really good.
if we got a tri-chair. So, but we continue to be willing to work with you on that. Let's see. Challenges. As in the case with any program, you know, there are opportunities to improve, and as we have in the past, we continue to see some opportunities, and some of these will be reiterations of what I've, or Bobby, or previous co-chairs or tri-chairs have mentioned to you before. At the time estimates were made for the 2004 bond program, land purchases, the real estate market was in a different place in this area. Since that time, the cost of land has risen substantially, and program contingency funds are being used to make up the cost difference. Funds must be made available in the maintenance and operations budget to ensure the maintenance of the capital improvements provided by the bond programs will be sufficient. Otherwise, a lack of maintenance to expensive equipment and building systems will not support the taxpayer investment in AISD facilities. While AISD has a significant sustainable effort, the committee continues to encourage the district to explore additional sustainability practices. For instance, installation of building management systems, summer shutdown programs, raising and lowering temperature set points. As a substantial portion of the 2008 bond contingency program funds have been allocated, there are still several projects pending that could unexpectedly require more funds, such as the PAC to North Central Elementary, and this bears close monitoring by the CBOC as well as the board. Well, once again, we want to thank you for this opportunity to spend with you this quality time. And any additional?
Just like she started it, you're finishing it.
But we really do relish the opportunity to come and present this report to you and give you an update on the work that we've been doing and any suggestions that we might have. Any additional questions that you might have?
Let's open it up. But thank you guys very much, and to your entire committee and task force, and our apologies on that. We actually thought we had somebody to tri-chair. We've got a little bit of communication, so we're going to work on getting that done quickly. But thank you all, and please relay our appreciation to the entire committee. Dr. Starfin.
I just had a recommendation about the surveys.
Sure.
When you're doing work that's probably, as complicated and controversial as the school calendar, which has had its high stress points and things along the way over the years. And believe it or not, our families seem to be pretty responsive to focused, well-written, especially if it relates to their school. You're not asking them about the whole universe of bond programs and AISD. But we have a phone surveying system. We went from getting about less than this, like 300 or so surveys on the school calendar when I first came here, to like 7,000. I mean, just like
What was the first?
7,000 responses, like 300, 300, a couple hundred, responses. People were doing them on the online survey stuff, and it was just hard to know if that was really. And then we would make a decision, and then parents would be like, "Why did y'all make that decision that we don't like starting winter break at this time, or we want the semester here," and so on. But now that we've been able to narrow it down, and then like really focus questions for secondary versus elementary, but the principal, with the help of the operations people, it's like the principal, somebody that they know, could you tape it in your voice. It can be, it can be in any language, Chinese, English, but we typically do English, Spanish, Vietnamese. And then you could focus the survey specifically on that school and probably get a much better rate of return. It's just making it easier for them to kind of weigh in without having to we just don't get great responses through the online surveys or having people turn back in paper surveys.
Yeah, and that's been for both bonds. We've had survey committees that have worked hard, and kind of have felt like they've beat their head against the wall, and we try this and we try that. You guys have all been on that. And so, yes, something different, we will definitely be passing that on to the survey committee because, yeah, to take those numbers. I mean, some schools, we get a lot of good feedback. Other schools, we get virtually no feedback. And so the point of any survey is to make it easy, to make it accessible. So, yeah, we appreciate the suggestion, and our committee is very, very interested in trying to make sure that we get that feedback and bring it back to the overall CBOC. So we appreciate the input.
We will pass it on to the subcommittee.
Other comments? Not sure why it won't stay on. Other comments or questions for our team, Mr. Torres?
Just a couple of quick comments. First of all, I want to echo our appreciation, and I find it very happy, I guess, to see that you guys enjoy your work and continue to enjoy your work so much, because it certainly has its challenges.
Let's not go too far. It's a good job.
And the one comment I would make is I really want to recognize your work and the work of staff in obtaining the 5-star rating for the McCallum Arts Center. That's really an outstanding achievement. I personally, and perhaps other professionals in my area would disagree with me, but I think the Austin Energy Green Building Program is much more appropriate to school facilities than the LEED system. I don't, quite frankly, I don't even think the LEED system should be used for schools. And so the fact that this program, which is probably the oldest energy recognizing program in the nation, that we were able to achieve a 5-star rating really speaks volumes of how we have changed over the years in terms of focusing on energy improvements and sustainability in buildings. So I want to thank you guys for doing that. I want to continue to advocate, as they say, buy local, to prioritize the use of the Austin Energy Program over the LEED system. And I think you're going to find that once again, it's really more appropriate for school facilities.
I have Paul and Kurt here, but I think that one of the issues is I think there's maybe some talk about the Austin program changing from their school designation or having the specific criteria for schools, and that's one of the issues or one of the reasons we went to the dual with LEEDs because of that issue.
Yes, sir. One of the things that we found is that the Austin Energy Green Building doesn't intend over a long period of time to continue to support they helped us customize a rating for schools, but I think they're running into budget problems and they're having to kind of ease back toward more of a commercial rating system. So we were sad to see that because we thought that it was a good program, but that's part of what we're looking at going forward, I think.
There is another national program that's sort of a competitor to the LEED system, and I suggest you might want to look into that if you're forced to. I think the LEED system is more based on money than it is a true objective assessment of facilities, and so I would, once again, my professional opinion is that some of these other programs out there that are more objective and not so money driven are probably better for our purposes. But it's sad that Austin Energy is going to be able to continue to support that because I think theirs truly was based on looking at the value of these building changes and modifications. So,
Ms. Snyder.
I wanted to talk to you a bit about technology. I saw the technology update here on page 23, and it looks like we're buying about another, I'm not sure, to be honest with you. It's either 12,000 devices or perhaps only 5,000, depending on how I'm reading it. But it strikes me that, technology, we all know, is something that changes extremely rapidly. And between 2008, when we first started looking at this and implementing it, and what's available today, I don't think anyone would have thought about clouds or tablets, even 3 years ago, although the first tablets were starting to hit the horizon about that point in time. I recently saw within the last week where I think it's McAllen is buying tablets for every one of their students and distributing their courseware and course books on those tablets. And, we talked a bit about how athletics is, one of those things that needs improvement. To my way of thinking, technology is right up there with it, if not ahead of it. And I'd like to know, I think at some point we had a presentation on a kind of a grand technology plan, but I'm not sure that's been updated or where we stand with that. So I'd like to encourage you folks to think in those terms and, push us forward in a direction that's going to be a little bit better than having a 3-year plan to implement something, which with technology is basically shooting yourself in the foot, is what it comes down to. So if you guys could think about that, it's certainly something I would appreciate.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
And I'm going to suggest that Ms. Brister may be working with Mr. Hauser, who all the technology was getting a district technology update, both classroom technology, system technology. Kind of, we get it periodically, but it's almost like a human capital update. How does all the technology fit together and where are we moving? And the advances in that area are very quick as it relates to educational resources. And as we know with the instructional allotment, it's really being geared more to technology now than even textbooks. So, okay, that's great. Other questions, comments? We'll let these gentlemen go home. Thank you very much. And you can, y'all appreciate it, and you can just tell these other guys, haha, we get to you first right behind you as you walk out.
Yeah. We'll do that.
So we're gonna take just to give these people appreciation, people want to take about a 2-minute, if you want to step away to go tell them thank you, we can do that. And if we lose 5.
Thank y'all.
Thank y'all.
Appreciate it.
You go. Okay. Thank you, gentlemen.
Sitting is my world.
Nice job.
It's good to see you.
I was just saying I knew where you were going, and I said I didn't want to go there.
Okay, give us just a minute. We got a little bit of scramble going.
Yeah, we need to exit. See if we can close this one.
I'm sorry. Should have put it a little closer to you. Yours too. Yours already grown. While we're greedy. How are you, sir? Good to see you. How are you? You don't have a million other things.
That's it. That's it.
Y'all are actually the new specs. I'm kind of talking to these guys.
Yeah, they look like the same.
We hope to work for you too.
Thank you very much.
Paul, you're pushing the slides.
I'm gonna push the button, sir, whenever you tell me.
You'll be able to tell because I'm going to read right along. Evening.
Yes.
Out with the CBOC, in with the SIBPAC.
Sir?
Out with the CBOC, in with the SIBPAC.
Jack, give yourself enough time. How are you? Ready to rock and roll? Yes, sir. All right. We got 5. Let's go.
Save the best for last.
Thank you all for being here.
Okay.
Dr. Starfman.
Mr. President, trustees, at the March 26th regular meeting, the board is scheduled to receive the superintendent's recommendation for possible proposed action regarding the planning for a future bond election. As you recall, the Capital Improvement and Bond Planning Advisory Committee, SIB-PAC, is the superintendent's advisory committee that was formed as part of the Facility Master Plan framework. Its charge is to assess the district's facility needs and to make a recommendation to the superintendent as to whether the district should begin planning for a bond election. The SIB-PAC conducted a high-level review of several broad categories of information related to the capital improvement needs of the district. Detailed responses to questions that arose during presentations were provided by staff and community experts. The SIB-PAC also heard presentations on current demographic trends, an economic forecast from the Federal Reserve Bank economist, and an overview of the district's financial condition, tax rate, debt obligations, and bond election scenarios. My goodness. Wow. Tonight, the SIB-PAC co-chairs, Mr. Albert Hawkins and Mr. Richard Frazier, will provide an update on the committee's work and respond to any questions you may have. Again, the board is currently scheduled to take action on an item related to this committee's work at its March 26th regular board meeting. So I'll turn it over to you, and y'all can jump in there. And just like I said before, thank you so much for your service. I know y'all have not missed a single meeting. I think Richard's been doing this since he was about 16 years old, it seems. He's been on since he's been.
Before I didn't have any gray hair when I started.
Oh, you didn't have any gray hair before you started. Very nice. But again, on behalf of the administration, our schools, we really appreciate y'all putting so much into this and really making a commitment to give us good advice so we can be responsible with our taxpayer dollars. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. President and trustees. And I think Dick and I both feel honored to serve the district in this capacity. It's been a benefit for us as well as the superintendent, I hope, as we finalize some of our deliberations. We did want to take a few minutes tonight to update you on some of our deliberations and the progress that we think has been made, given the charge that's been laid out. And I think there's a slide presentation that we could use to follow along. And we really are happy to have this opportunity to share with you and dialogue a little bit about where we are and see if there are any other areas that you think we should examine or investigate a little further. We do have one additional meeting planned for the Capital Improvement Program Bond Advisory Committee, or advisory committee, if you just like to say it for short. If you take a look at the first slide, it gives you some background on the SIB-PAC. It is established as an advisory committee to the superintendent pursuant to a charter that was established. The committee has met 3 times already, once in January and twice in February. And as I said, we have one additional meeting to finalize our recommendations. During the course of our meetings, we've received an overview and examined in some detail the capital improvement needs of the district. As Dr. Korstoffen said, our task is to bring a recommendation back to the superintendent, and it is scheduled for your review, I believe, at the meeting on the 26th. Looking at slide 2, we have been charged with, based upon a review and evaluation of the capital improvement needs of the district, we've been charged to to make a recommendation back to the superintendent whether the district should organize and activate a Citizens Bond Advisory Committee, or CBAC, to plan for a future bond program. More details on the committee's charge are provided on slide 3, and just kind of highlight some of those things for you. Certainly, during the course of our deliberations, the advisory committee has examined all of the items that are listed on the slide and in the charge, and we've looked into the implication that each of those items has with regard to our capital improvement needs. And we'll cover some of those items in more detail as we move deeper into the presentation. Going now to slide 4, one of the early things I think we took to the committee is to create a better understanding of the difference between the Capital Improvement Bond Planning Advisory Committee and a possible Citizens Bond Advisory Committee, or CBAC. And again, highlighting the charge that was given back to CIDPAC, our general charge is to make a recommendation whether or not to move forward with the formation of a CBAC. A CBAC, once established, would have much more detailed review of the capital improvement needs and decide upon the priorities that should be addressed with any possible bond issue, and would make a recommendation back to you, the Board of Trustees, on the scope of work that would be included in that future bond issue. In the event that the Board of Trustees would approve that scope of work, then the CBAC would also be enlisted to provide high-level communication and education to the community about the specific needs that would be addressed and the costs and the benefits back to the district for that. So there would be a continuing role for the CBAC. Slide 5 highlights the memberships of the membership of the CIDPAC, and there are 21 members who have been serving on this advisory committee, and certainly on behalf of Dick and myself, I'd like to acknowledge and thank those committee members for their participation and the service they've given. There's been a lot of information and material that they've received and have internalized during the course of our meetings, and it's been a challenge for them, but we've had good and strong participation, and we really appreciate their volunteer and their support for this. It is, you probably recognize some of the names of persons on the committee, and it is fairly diverse. It gives us expertise in finance, construction. There are representatives of stakeholders, of economic development, information technology, engineering, policy, and business. And so I think a number of disciplines are well represented among the membership, and they have been actively involved in the deliberations. Looking at slide 6, and actually the next 2 slides as well, it lays out a little summary of the types of information that we've reviewed and examined as members of the advisory committee. Of course, we have gone over the charge and have covered the key elements for the from the AISD strategic plan. We spent quite a bit of time with the facility master plan framework and some of the documentation that supports that. We've gotten information about previous bond programs to provide a context for our purpose and help inform our recommendation going forward. Also, the committee has developed and agreed to use a decision framework, which we hope will help guide the committee to its final recommendation back to the superintendent. Let's take a look at slide 7. And that, again, illustrates some of the information that the committee has examined and discussed. This included a comprehensive review of facility conditions, looking across the entire school district. The staff has done a tremendous job in gathering that information, and it's grouped in a way that's been very useful for our evaluation. It's grouped by individual building or campus. It also is grouped by categories so that we could take a look at whether it's roofing or HVAC needs, athletic facilities, so various categories of information. And so it's been prioritized as well by some key indicators. We've also had a chance to look at some of the needs and the technology needs and information services, looking at pupil transportation needs as well. And so I believe we've had a pretty thorough and extensive look across all the capital improvement areas that the district deals with. We also got updated on some of your more recent action using contingency funds from the 2008 bond program. And so with that decision, I think you can expect that, as you might expect, then any needs that's addressed by that decision will not need to be considered in a future bond proposal if there's one established. So that $16.1 million has been used to address many of the priorities that were already identified as capital improvement needs for the district. Again, I'd like to offer our commendation to the staff for the support that they've given us. They've been quite supportive, quite responsive to our information needs, and we've had a few information requests, and they've come back and responded to those. They've done additional analysis and presentations. We had a remarkable presentation on the financial approaches and strategies that the district used, the technology, the transportation issues, and Dick Frazier is going to walk through some more of that detail for you as he takes us through the key considerations and key findings of the advisory committee at this point.
So that's slide number 9. If you take a look at that with me. Comprehensive review of the facility condition, including the currently critical and potentially critical priorities, which the staff has come up with a $342.5 million price tag. And then also functional equity, identification of core areas, including cafeterias, gyms, libraries, administrative spaces, and specialized classroom spaces. Science, art, would include fine arts, career, and technical education. And I think that's where your athletic fields possibly would be dovetailed in as well, though that doesn't necessarily, I don't know if it is included in the $125.9 million. I know there's at least that much that we've discovered. If you look at number 10, educational adequacy, that just assumes that a room that is designed for a particular purpose has everything needed for that purpose. Assessment of how well facilities are equipped to deliver instructional program. And that's a part of our master planning. We look at the capacity, the support for programs, the technology, the supervision and security, the instructional aids, the physical characteristics, a bunch of things to make sure that the space is suitable for instruction. And an example of that would be inadequate teacher storage or inadequate marker board or bulletin boards in a classroom, those kinds of things. Then next on there, you can see on slide 10, the American with Disabilities Act, the ADA, Texas Accessibility Standards, assessment of compliance with that. We take a look at that, and the total cost to address compliance if all renovations were required would be $199.8 million. And those are really serious things that we discussed. Moving to number 11, that includes information services, AISD, police security, and pupil transportation. We got really good presentations from these folks that work for our district about all of those areas. And again, we've itemized some or listed some costs here, including buses at $91.5 million, $34.9 million, and $17.9 million, respectively, to keep with the district's pattern for replenishing buses. If you go on then with me to number 12, and these are the capital improvements prepared by the staff to address future population growth, and they include 7 elementary classroom additions in the northwest, north central, northeast, and southwest, and southeast regions of the district at a cost of $40,668,911. 2 middle school classroom additions in the northwest, and you can see the cost there. 4 new elementary schools, 1 in the northeast and 1 in the southeast regions of the district, and 2 undesignated elementary schools. You can see the cost indicated there. And 1 new high school in the south region of the district at a cost of $111,197,309. Total projected cost for these capital improvements would be $337,555,564 million. And again, these are all potential improvements or new construction related to student population. If you go to number 13, this is where we get into the decision-making part of the process. These are the questions in the framework that we started discussing. Does the district have major unfunded capital improvement needs? Are these needs urgent and need to be addressed in the short term? Does the amount of funding needed require longer-term financing? Is there sufficient capacity to incur additional long-term debt? Are economic and community indicators favorable for bond election? And we gave these questions to the folks, and well, they helped us develop them. And we started with them at the very beginning of our meetings and have continued to bring those back up to the surface as each meeting has occurred. They're basically our guiding questions. If you look at number 14, these are some of we're getting to the key findings here. During the discussion, several members of the district expressed agreement that the district does have major capital improvement needs, should take advantage of the current low interest rates, should use capital investments instead of maintenance and operation funds to address identified capital needs, has effectively managed bond debt with its commercial paper strategy, would have consequences for delays in addressing pressing facility needs. And I want to compliment Nicole again for, is she still here? Yes. For an absolutely wonderful presentation to us concerning how the district does all of their Monday. This will allow taking advantage of the current low interest rates, the importance of using capital investments instead of maintenance and operations funding, the effective practice of managing bond debt, et cetera. And all of these things, we've been really, really impressed with the information that's been given us. If you go to number 15, please. These are more collateral issues that I think are a part of our findings. The need for an education program for the public that specifies the need for the bond program, how student learning will be supported and improved, and how each school will benefit, impact of the school finance systems on the district's budget, effect of the authorization of additional bonding on the property tax rate, impact of tax ratification election and bond election on the property taxes, impact of a tax ratification election, and possible taxpayer fatigue, and challenge of funding capital improvements from the M&O budget. The education thing is a big part of this. That a big concern that several of the folks on the committee brought up. I think that we can talk about that a little bit more when we do our questions, but I think it's a real big part of what our findings will present to you. On the last slide, I believe it's the last one. No, it's the next last one. Number 16, collateral issues that need to be addressed, importance of efficient use of existing available capacity and related issues, boundary changes, transfers, and school repurposing, emphasis on the district's successes and effective management of resources, assessment of the level of community support for bond election. And recommendations, and this is our last slide, number 17. A consensus was reached affirming the need for the formation of a CBAC. Committee requested an additional meeting to review and refine collateral issues, and that meeting is going to happen on the 21st of March, I believe. This meeting will be held before the superintendent's recommendation to the Board of Trustees for consideration of the March 26, 2012 regular meeting. And that's our presentation. And we'd love to have questions or concerns or whatever. Well, thank you, gentlemen. express our appreciation to your entire committee for all the really good work. I think your decision framework 5 questions are great. I mean, they really are a pretty thoughtful way to look at what we have and try to decide where to go. So appreciate all your efforts, appreciate the meeting that's coming up, and we'll look forward to superintendent's recommendation. But in the meantime, let's open it up for comments or questions. Dr. Starfman.
Just before we jumped into all the questions, I just wanted to give a little more background to the facility master planning framework. In addition to this, another new thing that we are putting in place for the framework is the BAC, which is the replacement of FUBTUF,
Yes.
Facility Use and Boundary Task Force. So it's the Boundary Advisory Task Force. And, I'm sorry? Oh, so, oh, did I say task force? Oh, yeah, scratch that. The Boundary Advisory Committee, BAC. And so that's one other piece to the facility planning that we are putting together. I know the names have been coming together for this month, and we're going to have those folks looking at all this information as well. So that's not something we've been able to pull together at the exact same time, because they're also going to be looking at boundaries. So we might have a couple of different options, not to take away at all from the needs of this, of what you've already been looking at. But as we try to figure out ways to manage the potential cost to taxpayers, we still are going to spend some time looking at boundaries as well before we would launch any, formal request for bonds or expenditures in that way. So we still have that work to do, which is running parallel to all this other stuff as well. So we'll have a report on that later in the school year.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Mr. Schneider.
Dr. Starfin, let me get to your Boundary Advisory Committee. Do you view that as just making or getting input on new facilities or changes to existing boundaries to better utilize facilities, or what's the discussion going to be?
Mr. President, Trustee of the Board, Trustee Schneider, it'll be a little of both for sure. And there, we're hoping to get, I know as our pattern has been that we try to invite people from existing task forces or structures that we've had and try to have some continuity of, historical information about, or institutional knowledge about how we've been doing things, and then bringing in, other fresh Austin talent to the table as well. So we're going to look to some of the people that have been on the past task force work, and also just, what is all the new thinking? What are some of the things in the future potential AFRs? And really trying to get everybody who's making any decisions about facilities or considering our facilities with the impact of our academic designs all on the same page with the same information. But I do see them looking at new and existing boundary structures to try to improve efficiency, but also help us manage under and over enrollment. We know from our past experience that the concept of closing schools is not popular in Austin. So some of these things will not be managed just by thinking about building new buildings. I mean, we'll have to rethink programming, put in stronger programming in on the fence or failing schools. Also step it up about managing our enrollment numbers by looking at our boundaries. And so I think it's going to be a combination of both at minimum.
Okay. I would think that would need to be done fairly soon, especially if you're going to make a recommendation of some kind to the board here in the next month. Is that correct?
No. Oh, wait, you mean for boundaries or for whether or not we should consider a bond?
Consider a bond.
Well, I think that's one small part. It's not the line shares you just heard tonight. I mean, you're talking about priority 1 and priority 2 level needs.
I see, and I agree totally. But
So, I don't
when
think
we start talking about new facilities, which roughly 20%, 25% of the bond recommendation that is done here is either new facilities or additions, classroom additions to existing facilities. I mean, I would think that we would want to examine boundary relief before we started talking about new facilities or adding on to existing facilities.
Well, as the board knows and approved, we're doing it in conjunction with all this work. So it's not going to be before and after, or we're going to wait another year. It's all happening this spring. It's all being considered. And remember, because they did a nice, separation of what the CIBPAC does and what the CBAC does. So my expectation is what the CIBPAC is doing is their charge. Getting our work with the boundaries and considering all those things would be what the CBAC does, because they're the ones that are going to determine the scope of the work. And so the scope of the work, could be as large, medium, or small, depending on all the things that go into the hopper. But I don't think that at all delays what the CIBPAC is doing, as their charge is clearly different to the CBAC. So I agree with you. I think it has to happen in the facility master plan framework. It is structured to happen that way. My COO tells me that we are, as I've seen, things are falling into place. The CIBPAC is here, and we were working madly to make all those things happen. So I have great confidence that we're getting into a pace and a clip that's going to serve the board well, and that when you finally decide what's appropriate to go into a bond package, all those other things will come together. So I agree, but I don't think that the BAC has to necessarily meet before you take action on what the potential recommendation is by the CIBPAC.
As a matter of fact, that's been one of the topics and areas of discussion for the advisory committee, and exploring that very same point. And the conclusion has been that certainly any decision about the final structure of a bond program, if it's proposed, needs to have taken into account and been informed by any boundary or changes in transfer policy. But that is not necessary for those things to be completed before you go further in the process. And so, but before it's finalized, certainly that needs to feed into any decision or proposal that comes from the BCAC.
Okay. And I agree, and I appreciate that you're looking at both boundary and the transfer stuff.
Yes, sir.
Because
Yes. And there are
Yeah.
areas of consideration that the task force would like.
Well, we're looking at,
Advisory committee.
Advisory
yeah.
committee.
We're looking at all of that, because it can be such a huge issue that you can paralyze yourself by going, well, if we've not taken completely care of this, we've not taken completely care of that. But if you do it that way, progress stops. And in order for progress to continue, we've got to evaluate all of those different inputs, but continue to move forward. The need is that great, and that's basically the consensus of the group.
And I just don't want to be only lip service, that yes, we're thinking about it, we're looking at it, and gee, something may happen someday.
No, but I do want to say that it's going to be, from my experience, it's going to be a gradual process to right itself with both transfer policy and with the issues with boundaries. It has to be something that we work on constantly. And over a period of time, I think those can be corrected. But at the same time, we've got to pursue, and this is the core of the issue, we've got to pursue a reasonable set of continuous initiatives to maintain our infrastructure. And that it would include a bond. And this is a good time for a bond in many ways, even though the economy is not perhaps fully recovered yet. The interest rates are low, and we have a wonderful financial manager in place for the district, and those are some of the lessons that we'd like to make sure that the community hears.
Okay.
There are certainly lessons I've learned.
Yeah, and I see what you're saying. I would just ask that you be aware that there are people out there that ask, what are we doing waiting to have a bond to take care of the AC or the window or whatever the issue is? I mean, why isn't the district, and this is their perception of it, better
Yeah.
managing their funds to be able to do this without having to go out for a bond election.
Well, for example, you mentioned technology earlier and talking, there are people that are upset or get concerned about the fact that we use bond money to purchase technology, and we're kind of backed into a corner as the result of the way the structure is set up. But we are, as Nicole showed us, exploring using shorter-term bonds to meet the needs of a more rapidly changing technological structure or technological interface system or whatever you want to call it. We had a really good presentation from our chief organizer, or the leader of our technology department, and with his plans and his future needs. And so I think, I think we're doing a really a very good job in a very difficult set of problems and issues trying to maintain all of this. It's very much a juggling act.
Okay. The just back of the envelope calculation I made on your priority 1 and priority 2 request was around 1.2 billion. Is that roughly correct?
It's 350. Are you including everything that?
Everything?
Yeah, if you did everything, and again, that gets us into the same what is the function of our group as opposed to the CBAC, which would be coming next. And that's not really our function. We were to identify issues and preponderance of evidence that we needed to do something in terms of a bond. At that point, the CBAC would have to choose, and along with your input and input of the community and everyone probably in Austin and in surrounding areas that wanted to have a say, what our priorities should be in that scope of work that we were discussing earlier. So yeah, if you went and did every single thing that we could conceive of, that's what it would come total to. But I certainly don't think that'll be what would come out of the group.
Is it the view of your group that the Citizens Bond Advisory Committee would have either additional things to add to this that aren't even in the discussion, or some kind of final say as to what goes in or out of the, what's the process there?
That's, again, outside of what we've been set up to do. We got a definition of what a CBAC would be, and that would be most of the issues that you're discussing or that you brought forward would be something that would be either from you folks or from them. Basically, so far, all we've determined from the work that we've done is that there is a good need or a likely need that we need to move forward and create such a committee, and then you'd have to decide from historical precedent, I would guess, as to what that group normally does. I do think, just as if I could be personally speak here, I do think that this work is very complicated, that I would be very careful about how I set up that next group, and that some of the things that you brought up would certainly need to be considered as they're created.
I've got some more questions, but I'll
Dr.
go.
Sharp.
Mr. President, Trustee Board, Trustee Snyder, I was just going to say that we have other diagnostic assessments going on, like I said earlier when we were talking about the budget, that we would want to put in the hands of the CBAC, and not to belabor it, but the one on fine arts. I know that's not, like, while that may have been discussed here, it hasn't been discussed against the research piece that the Kennedy Center has been working on with all the art talent of Austin through our work with them. So Mind Pop and others, yeah. We just have everybody in Austin involved in sorting through all of that from elementary to high school, but mostly, really trying to understand how we can address many of the inequities around the services that we're providing there. And that will probably, and since that's not done, sort of like the BAC isn't complete either, those are other big pieces to our work that I would anticipate that the BAC, because the
CIMPAC.
CIBPAC. It's because the acronym changes on slide 3 and slide 4. They're different. So, so anyway, it keeps throwing me off. So, so I anticipate that we'll be bringing other things to the CBAC and that will help inform, give them more information so they can determine and prioritize the scope and the extent to which we might, do this work. So we have a few other things that we'll be providing, and in anticipation that they'll have far more than the CIVPAC had regarding their work and their charge.
Mr. Torres. And I guess maybe this question is a little more for you, Dr. Karstarf, because I think the committee has done a good job to stick to their charge and limit that work to that. But with regard to other work that's going on, one of the things the board has mentioned is making sure that as we reinvest in our facilities, we aren't just adding an addition, that we're improving and adding value to a school, to not make renovations just more of the same, but have them support and enhance the academic curriculum. And as we're talking about athletic facilities, you mentioned how for fine arts there's this effort going on to help educate and help people understand the value of fine arts. We don't have a comparable effort going on in the athletic area. And I think that's what always puts athletic at a disadvantage, is it's very easy to go out and get a grant for some of these other areas. But I want to bring us back to ensuring that as this work winds down and we start to consider reinvesting in our existing facilities, where we say, due to growth, we are going to add a wing. Well, are we just going to add a wing? I mean, that really adds no value. It just keeps us at a fancier building of the same. So I would hope that we have some effort going on that will help us look at reinvesting in our existing facilities to bring them up to some of our newer facilities and renovate, demolish, whatever we have to do, the existing facilities, so that where we're, quote, just adding space for growth, we're actually improving the value at the same time at that campus. So that's all I have to say.
Mr. President, Trustee of the Board, Trustee Torres. So while I know there was a lot of controversy around the task force work, if you could separate all of that, and I don't know if the facility master plan task force, the task force.
My task force.
Yes. So if, but if you take out, and I've actually, I've read the report cover to cover multiple times. And a lot of what you described, like the reinvesting in the buildings, like, and some of the reinvestment that would be required to do these kinds of things, it means that the community of Austin would have to trust this board and the planning around facilities for us to be able to manage, these kinds of reinvestments, if you will, where you are effectively kind of closing or having a plan where you're rotating students in and out of facilities to give you a chance to do something really significant with the building. In some cases, quite frankly, we should raise the building and rebuild the right thing so that we can serve kids better and have a higher quality facility and address a lot of the things that people say that they want and desire. But even in post conversations, we're almost a year to date since we heard the proposal from the task force. It is still very hard to have those conversations at our school sites with our school communities. So while I think that there are a lot of smart people even on this advisory committee, and there are going to be just as smart folks on the CBAC, and there were really smart folks on the task force, at the end of the day, we're going to have to deal with the community tolerance for doing some of the things that you just talked about. And it is going to require some pretty significant commitments to allowing us to almost in some cases close schools so that you can work on it, rebuild it, get it sorted out and reopen it. But right now, that is a very hard conversation to have, and where people end up is, and even to some of the things Mr. Schneider said, I mean, while I know that we have some solutions that could save this community tens of, almost maybe in some cases, $100 million on a bond effort by simply managing boundaries and transfers a little better, right? I don't know if that would be just as hard as trying to close a school. I mean, I'm not sure we have the community will to get behind this stuff and see it all the way through. And so, as you know, just as your executive for the organization, I keep seeing two buckets that perhaps the people of Austin, while it is inefficient and not the first stop that I would make around trying to manage our infrastructure better and align us better for the academic outcomes and programming that we're trying to do in AISD, against the political fallout, the perception issues, the challenges around building trust with the community. I'm almost at a place where I believe people are willing to pay more, even though it's not an efficient use of money, to be able not to have that other stuff happen. And it's something that we're painstakingly trying to tease out, that if we're going to move on this path, I would say as a school community, this facility master plan that we still don't have yet, although we have a framework, that we don't have yet, I actually think you're several years out before you could even get to a place to start in that kind of direction. And I don't say that to like throw ice water on the big planning, but the reality of what we've been dealing with is just really painful. And I agree with all the things that you've said, but it's going to be a ride down a several-year road with a very clear plan that's going to take probably a couple years to get together in the first place and map it all out so that everybody knows exactly when things are going to happen, and you better hit on every cylinder at the right time in the right place, because it will just completely erode our ability to be able to manage something like that. And I just think this is one of the hardest things I think I've ever experienced in a job like this, and that's getting our facility planning aligned to academics and doing all the tough stuff in between to get Austin to the place that I think people really want to be. But that getting there is a war. And it's going to take a lot of time. But our teams, and we'll bring Albert Hawkins back, and Richard will work for another 7 years to try to make this happen for us. But I just think that is one of the realities and why we struggle so much in this area.
Just that reminds me, y'all did not say the word relish, but that's okay. We can
No,
Okay.
the AAFRs that we started last year, where you were setting up individual solutions to problems or situations. If I could just put my little 2 cents worth in, I think that's a wonderful thing. And Austin is a lot of small communities that live in the same general area. And if you take a blanket approach to Austin in any area, I don't see it being effective. But if you take a small community approach to every area, I do see that being effective. I just don't think you can do it all at once. I think you have to pick a piece and a piece and a piece. And so I would echo with what Dr. Karstafen just said, and what I was trying to say a while ago. She said better than I did probably, which is this is not an overnight solution. But it's certainly something we have to work on in every area, and sadly all at once. And what can't happen is that you can't get paralyzed in any one area. We've got to continue to push in all areas at once to get to where we need to be. And I think if I've learned anything in my time working with the task force and now working with this group, that's the answer that I have.
I appreciate your response to my non-question or question, but I think I was really more thinking more along the lines of what Mr. Frazier just said, is that one of the things that I think the committee has said is there's going to need to be a lot of activities that go on in support of just making this decision. In other words, the decision is, to some extent, the easy thing. It's almost pretty obvious, as you said.
And I would say that would be almost 100, well, I'd say it's pretty much 100% of our committee would agree with what you just said.
But it's other issues that the committee recognizes are important to making a successful bond, not just saying we need it and appointing a committee. And all I was trying to say is that that some of the estimates don't reflect some of this added value that we've been talking about as a board. And that's going to involve additional planning and time beyond sort of your standard, this is what it costs to build a wing. And in order for that to be done in a thoughtful manner, it's just going to take some time. And so I would ask from a board perspective that we think about the time that's involved in doing that, because as you say, you got to keep all the plates spinning, not just the ones that look like they're going to fall. And sometimes that's where we tend to focus our efforts. So.
Well, just for another example, we talked about athletic facilities earlier just a little bit, and when people think of athletic facilities, they think of football. But when I think of athletic facilities, I think of physical education. And I spoke a lot last year with the folks in town that do our physical education programs. And I really think to Austin, a cycling, running community, I think that if we presented athletic facilities from that perspective, we'd have a lot more success. And I do think that there would be more support for that, and for an educational messaging point of view, I really think that's an important thing. That's just my other little point.
I actually have a question for Mr. Torres, if I may, Mr. President. Can you just give me an example? I'm very intrigued by your, sounds like specific idea of a value add, like with building and how schools, I think I have an idea about what that means, but I'd like for you to articulate that.
As an example, we're requiring our students as they go into high school to be better and better prepared as they get into high school, so that when they leave high school, they're really college ready or they're career ready, life ready. And technology is one of those very important areas that we are all going to have to be proficient in. Yet, when you look at the middle school levels, our investment in technology for student engagement is much less than, say, at the high school level. And so as we look at adding a wing because we need more permanent classrooms, what do we do with the rest of the facility to upgrade it so that the technology that the students have access to in terms of some of their electives, are we looking at renovating and improving the facility to incorporate new opportunities for our students, or are we just going to add a wing and move on? That's what I'm saying, is looking at how we're developing our signature programs and what opportunities we're trying to build within a vertical team. How do we bring that in from the middle school level so that as they go to high school, we're incorporating that in our facilities planning, because we know the population is going to be there. So it's that it might be fine arts in another, once again, if you look at our middle schools tend to be sort of the absolute minimum in terms of what they need. But as we try to prepare our kids to have better opportunities in high school, what that really means is they need to have had some kind of preliminary exposure at the middle school level. So I'm thinking about enhancing those facilities at the middle school level as well.
If I may, Mr. President. Okay, yeah, my idea was about along the same line. I think about adding at a high school level maybe an auditorium that can accommodate a lecture class, so we can have lecturer in South Austin that teaches a bunch of kids in schools all around the city, things like that. So where we get more capacity out of, than we normally would out of a particular sort of space or size space or,
You mean like video conferencing?
yeah.
Yeah.
a little bit, yeah. So a little bit of, combo teaching sort of style. So yeah, we could hit on a bunch of areas that way with using our facilities better in that way, or, developing in the future. But I think that I had a comment too, just about this conversation. I think every conversation we've had tonight just kind of illustrates that education is changing. We're at a pivot point in term where everything is driven by a dollars conversation first, it seems, and then, so as it should be, and then something else. So yeah, the time is now to consider how we're going to pivot and how we can shape our community perception of what this board and what this district is doing in terms of being ready for this change.
Other comments or questions? Ms. Schneider?
One of the things that I noted on here, I was looking at your membership, and I actually talked to a member this afternoon, and that individual was somewhat unaware that recommendations like these were going to be made. And one of the things I would like to see is the, when you get into specific areas about where we need schools, whether they're new schools, additions to schools, that kind of thing. I was a little concerned about the membership representing all the vertical teams that we have within the district. And I mean, I was struggling to identify individuals that were from South Austin as an example. So I would hope that, I mean, to me, there's a couple of ways to cure this. I mean, you could just say, based on the demographics, we think we need this number of schools and leave it up to a future advisory committee that has a somewhat more rounded representation to.
And that is actually the approach.
Okay.
And so just to distinguish some of the things we've done, we've looked at student growth and utilization information at a high level, have assessed the level of capacity that exists, and have reviewed the need for additional capacity. And while there are some general thoughts about which sector of the city that of the district that capacity might be needed, this this advisory committee is not taking the step of designating any specific area.
I appreciate that, but your recommendations say new elementary school in Northwest or Northeast or, that kind of thing. So, to me, in some sense, the seed has already been planted for, where things should be. So that's a little bit of a concern.
And so as we've looked at some of the demographic and growth information,
Right.
I think it leads you to those parts of the district.
Yeah. And I have a long-standing issue with demographics in the city. I mean, it comes from living in an area where our schools have historically been overcrowded. They're not as bad as they used to be, but they are still overcrowded. And, even our most recent demographic report, the year before this one, we were told that there would be no future growth in Southwest Austin. Things were pretty much already, done out. And, anyone that was driving out 71 or Southwest Parkway could see all the new homes that were going up in the area that this year they've identified as one of the hotter spots that we need to address in some way. So, it's a long-standing issue that we have issues with certain parts of the demographics that come forward. And I would really hope that we take a real balanced approach to where we're getting our data from and where those decisions are being made to get there. And just one kind of auxiliary request, and I saw it somewhere in the presentation, with regard to the bond program contingency funds, and I know this has been provided before, at least I think it's been provided before, is a copy of the legal opinion from the bond counsel on how we can use the surplus funds, because to me, there's a real contradiction between what we're saying we can be done and what the city appears to be going through right now with the use of the same kind of contingency funds. So just to help me understand how we can do certain things, but apparently the city is having somewhat of a difficulty in trying to do what at least are roughly equivalent. So.
Okay, let me kind of jump in on a couple of things. One, on the, I think what Mr. Hawkins was referring to is the previously approved bonds utilization of the contingency funds, for which we have a letter that was in our packet associated with that approval. They were saying that might adjust what they put together in terms of the needs, as I understand it.
As we examine
Yes,
the
sir. So-
overall needs of the district, that amount would.
Come off.
address
They're not
part of
necessarily
those needs.
proposing for additional utilization of a contingency fund. I think if you're asking for the letter that we did when the board approved it, we did get it as part of our packets at that point in time. Are you asking for another copy of that letter?
Yes, because I'm just trying to make sure that I understand what the difference is, and I'm not.
Difference between this and the city?
Yes.
Okay, so I think the request is to get a copy of the letter that we got back a couple months ago on the approval. Second thing I just want to make sure is that I think you were very nice in accommodating the answer, but when you first went through and talked about the capital improvements due to growth, I'm pretty sure I heard you talk about that this was the staff's recommendations, not necessarily the SIPAG's recommendations.
That is correct.
And that you
so-
just reflected it, and that obviously that the bond advisory committee would adjust and manipulate, but this wasn't something your committee came up with and drove
No,
this.
sir.
It was driven by the Democrats. So I didn't want you to take ownership for saying this was your recommendations. You were very nice to take
Appreciate that distinction.
observation.
And it is the demographic information that the staff has assembled, but we also received a very useful and interesting presentation from the city demographer as well.
Right.
And the overlapping areas between the district and the city. And there's a high level of match and agreement between those forecasts. It is as good as the data is available, though, and it does rely on certain assumptions. But that's a necessary part of working from it and going forward.